The notification flashed across my private laptop screen as another $50,000 disappeared from our shared accounts, presumably to fund the lavish lifestyle my husband now shared with his assistant. He emptied our joint savings without a second thought, never suspecting I was the trustee who controlled his family's fortune. The same fortune he'd need to access in exactly 30 days. A lifestyle that would come crashing down when the trust disbursement meeting revealed exactly who held the keys to his inheritance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first sign of trouble appeared on an unseasonably warm April morning. I had just returned from my quarterly business trip, a 3-day conference in Toronto where I'd been invited to speak about fiduciary responsibility and wealth management. The irony of that particular timing wasn't lost on me, even then. Our home, a restored Victorian in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood, felt unusually still when I entered. After 7 years of marriage, I had grown accustomed to the subtle rhythms of our shared life. The coffee maker that should have been running, the sound of CNBC playing in Richard's home office, the weekday hustle of a mutual morning routine. But that Tuesday, the house carried an emptiness that immediately set my instincts on alert. "Richard?" I called out, wheeling my carry-on toward the grand staircase. No answer. I found the explanation on our kitchen island, a hastily scrawled note explaining that he'd been called away on unexpected business and would return by the weekend. This wasn't entirely unusual. As the public face of his family's real estate development firm, Harrington Properties, Richard often traveled for meetings and site visits. What was unusual was that he hadn't mentioned it during our phone call just 12 hours earlier. I poured myself a glass of water and was about to head upstairs to unpack when my phone chimed with an automated alert from our bank. As a financial trustee who managed several high-net-worth family estates, I kept careful tabs on all my accounts, personal and professional. The notification showed a transfer of $15,000 from our joint account to an unfamiliar destination. A flicker of concern crossed my mind, but I initially dismissed it as Richard handling some business expense. I sent him a quick text. "Everything okay with the $15K transfer?" And headed upstairs to shower away the travel fatigue. When I emerged 30 minutes later, wrapped in a towel with hair still damp, I checked my phone. No response from Richard, but another notification had arrived. Another transfer, this time for $22,000. My professional instincts kicked in. I sat down at my desk and logged into our financial dashboard. What I saw sent ice through my veins. Over the past 48 hours, precisely timed with my absence, a series of transfers had systematically drained nearly 70% of our joint savings, all sent to the same unfamiliar account. I called Richard immediately, straight to voicemail. I tried his office. His executive assistant, Melanie, answered with a peculiar hesitation in her voice. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington. Mr. Harrington is unavailable. Would you like to leave a message?" "Melanie, it's urgent. I need to know where he is right now." A pause. "I believe he's in meetings all day." "Which meetings? Where? This isn't like you to be vague." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm sorry, I can't provide that information." The call ended, leaving me with a growing sense of unease. In 7 years, I had never received such a response from any of Richard's staff. Something was very wrong. I called our private banker next. Jonathan had handled the Harrington family accounts for over 20 years and had personally worked with me on several trust structures for other clients. If anyone could provide clarity, it would be him. "Eleanor, I was just about to call you," Jonathan said, his usual comfortable tone replaced with something more serious. "There's been unusual activity on the Harrington accounts." "I'm looking at some of it now. What else can you tell me?" Jonathan cleared his throat. "Multiple large withdrawals and transfers over the past 3 days, all authorized with proper credentials and verification. Legally, there's nothing unusual, but given the pattern and timing." "What's the total, Jonathan?" His response confirmed my fears. "Across all joint accounts, just over $1. $2 million has been moved. The transactions appear structured to avoid triggering our large transfer protocols." I thanked him and hung up, my mind already organizing facts and cataloging options. This wasn't just unusual activity. This was calculated. The timing during my absence, the structuring of transfers, the sudden business trip without details. The evidence suggested premeditation, not impulse. I moved to my secure laptop, the one connected to my private office network, not our home system. As one of Boston's most discreet trust attorneys, I maintained rigorous separation between systems. A decision that now seemed particularly prescient. What Richard never fully understood, what his father had specifically arranged before his death, was the extent of my professional involvement with the Harrington family's wealth. While Richard served as the public face of Harrington Properties, handling day-to-day operations and development deals, the underlying family fortune was controlled through a complex trust structure. A trust structure that had, at old William Harrington's explicit instruction, been placed under my legal stewardship 5 years ago. "My son has his mother's charm and my business instinct," William had told me during one of our final meetings, before his passing. "But he lacks the discipline for wealth preservation. You'll maintain the guardrails, Eleanor. Richard doesn't need to understand the details. Just make sure the legacy endures." I had honored that commitment faithfully, managing the trust with diligence while allowing Richard the autonomy to run the visible business operations. The arrangement had worked seamlessly until now. I logged into my professional system and reviewed the Harrington family trust documents. The timing was almost poetic in its perfection. In exactly 30 days, the trust was scheduled for its 7-year disbursement meeting, the formal review where, as trustee, I would evaluate performance and authorize the next phase of distributions to beneficiaries. Distributions that Richard was counting on to fund several ambitious development projects he'd been promoting to investors. Projects that had been extensively covered in the business press, with Richard promising unprecedented expansion backed by significant family capital commitments. I pulled up a secure messaging platform and contacted Maria Santos, my most trusted associate at the firm. "Maria, I need comprehensive activity reports on Richard Harrington, personal and professional, last 90 days. Priority authorization. Sycamore Protocol." Sycamore Protocol was our firm's highest-level investigative authorization, typically reserved for suspected fraud cases. Maria would understand the severity immediately. Her response came quickly. "Authorization confirmed. Timeline for delivery? 24 hours. And Maria? Complete discretion." "Understood. Initiating now." I closed the laptop and sat in silence, processing the situation. 7 years of marriage. Countless charity galas where we'd presented the image of Boston's perfect power couple, the brilliant trust attorney and the charismatic developer, carrying forward one of the city's oldest family legacies. All of it now cast in shadow by a series of bank transfers and an absent husband. The next step was clear. I needed to understand exactly what I was facing before deciding how to respond. Richard had emptied our accounts with obvious intent. The only question was why, and for whom. I changed into more comfortable clothes and prepared for what would likely be a long night. Before leaving my home office, I made one additional call to our security firm and had all access codes to our home changed effective immediately. If Richard returned unexpectedly, he would find himself locked out, a small but necessary precaution given the circumstances. As I headed downstairs to make coffee, my phone buzzed with a text message. Not from Richard, but from Caroline Westfield, a friend who sat on several of the same charity boards as me. "Eleanor, just saw Richard and Melanie at the Liberty. Thought you were out of town. Seemed rather familiar. Call me." The Liberty was one of Boston's most exclusive hotels. The final piece clicked into place with painful clarity. I set down my phone and took a deep breath. adjusting to this new reality. The money transfers, the sudden business trip, his executive assistant's strange behavior on the phone. My husband hadn't just betrayed our financial trust, he'd betrayed our marriage. And he'd done so without realizing one crucial fact. In 30 days, he would need to face me not just as his wife, but as the sole trustee controlling access to the Harrington family fortune. The fortune he would desperately need to continue, funding whatever new life he was planning. I picked up my phone and typed a single response to Caroline. "Thank you, I'm handling it." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then I opened my calendar and marked the date of the trust disbursement meeting with a new title, Day of Reckoning. Morning arrived with the crisp efficiency that had defined my professional life. I had slept surprisingly well, my mind having shifted from the emotional shock to analytical planning mode. A transition that had served me well throughout my career, managing complex trust disputes and high-stakes family wealth conflicts. By 6:30 a.m., I was seated at my kitchen island, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that I reserved for my most challenging court appearances. Before me lay 3 items: a steaming cup of French press coffee, my secure laptop displaying the Harrington Trust documents, and a legal pad filled with neatly organized notes. The doorbell rang at precisely 7:00 a.m. Maria Santos entered carrying a leather portfolio and a concerned expression. In her early 40s, Maria had been my right hand at the firm for nearly a decade. Her investigative skills were unmatched, particularly in cases involving financial impropriety. "You look better than I expected," she said, setting her things down and accepting the coffee I offered. "Professional detachment is a survival skill," I replied. "What did you find?" Maria opened her portfolio and laid out a series of documents. It's extensive and deliberate. What unfolded over the next hour was a methodical deconstruction of my husband's betrayal. Richard had been planning this for at least 4 months. Credit card statements revealed dinners at secluded restaurants. Hotel receipts documented weekend stays in New York and Washington, D.C., trips I'd believed were for development site visits. Phone records showed hundreds of texts and calls to Melanie's personal number, often late at night. The financial movements started small, Maria explained, turning to a spreadsheet. Testing the waters, perhaps. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, all carefully structured to appear as business expenses or investment movements. "And I missed it," I said, "the one acknowledgement of personal failure I would allow myself." "Eleanor, he deliberately timed the larger transfers for when you were traveling. He knew your schedule and exploited it." I nodded, turning to the next document. "What about the business side?" Maria's expression darkened. "That's where it gets interesting. Harrington Properties has been securing loans against anticipated trust disbursements. Richard has been promoting 3 major development projects: the waterfront complex in Providence, the mixed-use towers in Hartford, and the resort renovation in Newport. All marketed as fully funded through secured family capital commitments. Commitments I never approved, I noted. Exactly. But investors and partners believe the funding is guaranteed. The projects have broken ground. Contractors have been hired. Materials purchased. The burn rate is substantial. I tapped my pen against the legal pad. "And the most recent account transfers?" Maria slid forward another document. "We've traced them to a newly established LLC registered in Delaware 3 weeks ago. Sunset Horizons, LLC. The sole signatories are Richard Harrington and Melanie Crane." "They're planning to run," I said, the pieces aligning with perfect clarity. "It appears so. 2 first-class tickets to Grand Cayman were purchased yesterday from Melanie's corporate card. Departure scheduled for next Tuesday." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. 6 days before the trust disbursement meeting. Maria had worked with me long enough to recognize that particular expression. "You already have a plan." "The outlines of one," I confirmed, turning my laptop to show her the trust documents. William Harrington was many things, but naive about his son wasn't one of them. The trust contains specific provisions regarding beneficiary conduct. Maria scanned the highlighted section. Section 12. 4. In the event of demonstrable fiscal irresponsibility, moral turpitude, or actions deemed by the trustee to threaten the preservation of family assets, the trustee maintains unilateral authority to adjust, withhold, or redirect scheduled disbursements to any beneficiary. Old William called it his fool's folly clause, I explained. He inserted similar language into every significant family document. It gives me considerable latitude. And Richard never read the fine print, Maria said, understanding dawning. In her eyes. He dismissed trust management as boring paperwork better left to the attorneys. His father knew he would. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Boston skyline emerging from the morning mist. The Harrington name adorned several buildings visible from our home, a legacy built over generations. A legacy Richard was now jeopardizing for a flight to Grand Cayman with his assistant. "What's your next move?" Maria asked. I turned back from the window. "First, we secure what remains. Freeze any accounts I have signatory authority over. Cite suspicious activity and potential identity theft. Don't mention Richard specifically. That will flag at the bank," Maria noted, already making notes. "Good. I want Jonathan aware but not alarmed enough to contact Richard directly. Next, we need comprehensive documentation of the Harrington Properties situation. How over-leveraged are the projects, actually?" Maria consulted another document. Based on the loan-to-value ratios and the contingent trust disbursements he's promised, severely. Without the upcoming trust distribution, the Providence project alone will face immediate cash flow problems. The contractors are on net 15 payment terms, meaning they expect payment within 2 weeks of invoice submission, I clarified for my own thinking. How much is Richard counting on from the trust disbursement? Approximately $18.4 million for the next quarter. He's already allocated, most of it against outstanding commitments. I processed this information, mentally charting the optimal strategic response. We need to establish a parallel line of communication with key project stakeholders, contractors, lenders, investors, not to alert them to problems, but to establish my credibility as a legitimate financial authority. "Under what pretense?" Maria asked. "No pretense needed. As trustee of the Harrington Family Trust, I have fiduciary obligations to understand how trust assets are being deployed, standard due diligence. Nothing alarming about a routine review." Maria nodded appreciatively. "That gives you direct access without raising red flags." "Exactly. Meanwhile, I need you to prepare documentation for 2 scenarios." I returned to my legal pad and wrote out specific instructions. First, a contingency plan for restructuring the trust disbursements to protect the legitimate business interests while isolating Richard personally. Second, documentation supporting invocation of the fool's folly clause if necessary. "You're creating options," Maria observed. "Always. Richard believes he's operating with complete autonomy. That financial mirage extends to his business partners and investors. None of them understand that the money he's promised remains entirely under trustee discretion." I paused, considering the enormity of what I was contemplating. The actions I was planning would not just impact my marriage, they would affect hundreds of employees, multiple business partners, and 3 major development projects. "There's something else to consider," Maria said carefully. "The personal aspect." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the affair?" "Not just the affair. The intentionality behind it. The planning. The account draining wasn't an impulsive act. It was calculated. The timeline suggests he's been building toward this for months." I absorbed this uncomfortable truth. The betrayal wasn't a moment of weakness, but a sustained campaign of deception. Richard had sat across from me at dinner, shared our bed, attended functions at my side, all while methodically preparing to abandon our marriage and abscond with our joint assets. Your personal accounts, Maria continued. How exposed are you? Minimally, I replied. I've always maintained separate professional accounts. The joint accounts were primarily for household expenses and shared investments. Substantial, but not debilitating to lose. Small mercies, Maria muttered. No, I corrected her. Prudent planning. I've spent my career advising families on wealth protection. I would be a poor practitioner if I didn't follow my own advice. Maria gathered her documents, organizing them into clear categories. What about Melanie? She's potentially liable for corporate card misuse at minimum. I considered this angle. Melanie Crane had been Richard's executive assistant for 3 years. Intelligent, efficient, and by all appearances, professionally dedicated. I had seen no signs of impropriety, which spoke to how carefully they had covered their tracks. Hold that thought, I said, making another note. We may need leverage, but I want to understand her involvement more thoroughly before deciding how to proceed. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times. The day was unfolding and decisions needed to be made. One more question, Maria said, closing her portfolio. Richard doesn't know you're aware yet? No, and I'd like to maintain that advantage for now. How will you explain the account freezes when he discovers them? I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Identity theft concerns. Our accounts showed unusual activity while I was traveling. As a prudent financial professional, I took immediate protective action. I'll be devastated with worry about who might have targeted us. Maria's eyes widened slightly. You're going to play innocent. No, I corrected her. I'm going to play by the same rules he established. If Richard can conduct hidden affairs and drain accounts while presenting a loving facade, I can certainly express concerned confusion while putting my pieces into position. I walked Maria to the door, our next steps clearly established. Azar. She left. She turned back with an uncharacteristically personal question. Does it hurt? Underneath the strategy? I paused, momentarily allowing the professional armor to slip. Yes. But I've spent my career helping families protect legacies from those who would squander them. I never expected to defend the Harrington legacy from a Harrington himself, or from my husband. But that doesn't change what needs to be done. As the door closed behind Maria, I returned to my desk and opened my calendar. 6 days until Richard and Melanie's planned departure to Grand Cayman. 30 days until the trust disbursement meeting. The countdown had begun. I picked up my phone and composed a text to Richard. Missing you. When are you back? The house feels empty without you. Then I turned to my computer and began typing a formal letter on my professional letterhead. To whom it may concern. As trustee of the Harrington Family Trust, I am conducting a routine audit of all trust-related business activities. The opening moves had been made. Now it was time to set the board for what would come next. Richard's response came at 10:42 a.m. In meetings all day, probably back Sunday. Don't wait up. The brevity was telling. No terms of endearment, no questions about my trip, no specifics about his supposed meetings. Under normal circumstances, I might have attributed this to the distraction of a busy workday. Now, each word seemed calculated to maintain distance while providing minimal information. I set my phone down and returned to the dining room table, which had transformed into a command center of documents, financial statements, and legal materials. The morning's work had been productive. Jonathan at the bank had successfully implemented a security freeze on our remaining joint accounts, citing suspicious activity patterns consistent with identity theft. The Harrington Family Trust documentation was being quietly updated with addendums that would provide me maximum flexibility during the upcoming disbursement meeting. My desk phone rang, the private line reserved for select clients and professional contacts. Eleanor Harrington. Mrs. Harrington, this is Patricia Whitmore, calling from Harrington Properties. Patricia was the company's chief financial officer, a competent professional who had been with the firm since before Richard took over leadership. Her calling my private line rather than my cell phone suggested she was deliberately avoiding Richard's awareness. Patricia, how can I help you? A slight hesitation. I received your letter regarding the trust audit. I wanted to confirm this. Is a routine review? The question contained layers of meaning. Patricia was effectively asking if there was cause for concern. Standard procedure, I assured her, keeping my tone neutral. The 7-year disbursement review is approaching. The trust requires comprehensive documentation of how previous distributions have been allocated. I see. Another pause. And Mr. Harrington is aware of this review. As the primary beneficiary, Richard is naturally informed of all trust activities, I replied, sidestepping a direct confirmation. I'm simply fulfilling my fiduciary obligations as trustee. Of course. Patricia's tone shifted subtly. When would be convenient for you to visit our offices? I can prepare the necessary documentation. I appreciate your promptness, Patricia. However, I'd prefer to review the materials at my office first. Could you have the quarterly financial statements, project funding allocations, and current loan documentation sent over this afternoon? That's quite extensive, she noted, carefully. The trust disbursement involves significant assets. Thoroughness is essential. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Harrington, may I speak frankly? Please do. There have been some unusual financial movements recently. Mr. Harrington has been making commitments that stretch our operational capacity. As CFO, I've expressed concerns about our cash flow projections, particularly regarding the Providence development. This was more candid than I had expected, and extremely valuable. Patricia wasn't just cooperating, she was alerting me to problems. I appreciate your professionalism, Patricia. Perhaps we should discuss this in person. Would 4 p.m. today work for you? At my office, not Harrington Properties. I'll be there, she confirmed, a hint of relief in her voice. After ending the call, I immediately phoned Maria. Patricia Whitmore is coming in at 4. She's volunteering concerns about Richard's financial commitments. That's unexpected, Maria remarked. The CFO breaking ranks? Not breaking ranks, fulfilling her professional obligations. Patricia has always been meticulous about proper financial governance. If she's concerned enough to approach me directly, the situation at Harrington Properties may be more precarious than we realized. Want me to sit in on the meeting? Absolutely. And bring the Providence project files. I want to be fully prepared for whatever she reveals. The next few hours were devoted to preparation. I reviewed the trust's legal framework, focusing on provisions that would allow me to intervene in business operations if necessary. I also drafted several contingency scenarios, ranging from minimal intervention to complete reassignment of trust, disbursements away from Richard. At 3:30 p.m., I received another text from Richard. Need additional $200K transferred to operations account. Authorize ASAP. The audacity was almost admirable. Having already drained our personal accounts, he was now attempting to extract additional funds, likely to cover the cash flow issues Patricia had alluded to. The timing suggested he was scrambling to address immediate financial pressures. I did not respond. Patricia Whitmore arrived precisely at 4 p.m. In her mid-50s with impeccable silver-streaked hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, she had always struck me as someone who valued financial propriety above all else. Today, her typically composed expression carried an undercurrent of tension. Thank you for coming, Patricia, I greeted her, showing her into my private conference room where Maria waited with prepared files. I believe you know my associate, Maria Santos. Yes, of course. Patricia nodded professionally before taking a seat. Once settled, she withdrew a leather portfolio from her briefcase. "I've brought the documentation you requested, along with some additional materials I believe are relevant to your review. Before we begin," I said, "I want to assure you that this conversation falls under attorney-client privilege. Your professional candor is both protected and appreciated." Patricia's shoulders relaxed marginally. "Then I'll be direct, Mrs. Harrington. Harrington Properties is facing imminent cash flow challenges. The Providence waterfront development has experienced significant cost overruns. Contractors have submitted invoices totaling $3.7 million due within 8 business days. Our operating accounts currently hold approximately $2 million. A shortfall of $5 million, Maria noted. "Correct. Mr. Harrington has assured the board and investors that additional capital is forthcoming from family resources, but our Treasury Department has not received documentation confirming these transfers." I maintained a neutral expression. "And the Hartford and Newport projects?" "Similar situations, though the immediate payment pressures are not as severe. Hartford has vendor payments of approximately $8 million due in 3 weeks. Newport requires $3 million by the end of the month. A total immediate funding requirement of $8 million, I calculated aloud, with no confirmed source identified." Patricia nodded grimly. "Mr. Harrington has repeatedly referenced the upcoming trust disbursement as the funding solution. He's characterized it as a mere timing issue, bridge loans until the trust funds arrive." "Has he provided the board with documentation regarding the trust disbursement?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "He has presented summaries, indicating guaranteed distributions of $4 million scheduled for release in 30 days, now 29. When I requested the actual trust documentation, he said it was being handled by the family attorneys." I exchanged glances with Maria before continuing. "Patricia, as trustee of the Harrington Family Trust, I need to clarify something important. While the trust does have a scheduled disbursement review in 29 days, there are no guaranteed distributions. Each disbursement is subject to trustee review and approval based on specific criteria outlined in the trust documents." Patricia's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Are you saying the funds Richard has promised might not be forthcoming?" "I'm saying that all disbursements are contingent, not guaranteed. The trust was structured specifically to ensure that distributions serve the long-term interests of both the family and its business enterprises." The CFO took a moment to process this information. "Mrs. Harrington, without those funds, we cannot meet our current obligations. Construction would halt. Vendors would initiate legal action. The reputational damage would be severe and potentially irreversible. I understand the seriousness of the situation," I assured her, "which is why I'm initiating this review now, rather than waiting for the formal disbursement meeting." Patricia hesitated before asking her next question. "May I ask why Mr. Harrington isn't involved in this discussion?" As CEO, he should be addressing these financial challenges directly. It was the question I had been anticipating, the moment to decide how much to reveal. "Richard is currently unavailable," I said carefully. "And given the urgent nature of these financial concerns, I felt it necessary to gather accurate information immediately. As trustee, I have fiduciary obligations that exist independently of Richard's role as CEO." Patricia studied my face, her decades of financial experience allowing her to read between the lines. "I see," she said finally. "In that case, there's something else you should know." She withdrew another folder from her briefcase. 2 weeks ago, Richard established a new corporate entity, Sunset Horizons, LLC. He instructed our accounting department to transfer $4 million in development fees to this entity, characterizing it as a specialized project management consultant for the Providence development. "Was this entity vetted through normal procurement channels?" Maria asked. No, it was a direct executive authorization. When I questioned the unusual arrangement, Richard said it was a strategic partnership that required confidentiality due to competitive concerns. And did you investigate further? I prompted. Patricia's expression hardened slightly. I did. The business address for Sunset Horizons is a virtual office in Delaware. The only identified personnel are Richard and Melanie Crane. There is no evidence of legitimate project management capabilities or services being rendered. You've documented this, I assume? Thoroughly, Patricia confirmed, sliding the folder across the table. Including timeline, authorization documents, and transfer confirmations. My professional reputation is built on financial integrity. Mrs. Harrington, I cannot and will not be party to improper fund diversions. I nodded, respecting her principled stand. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Patricia. Your professionalism is commendable. What happens now? She asked. The Providence contractors need to be paid within 8 days. Without immediate action, we'll be in default. I considered our options carefully. The immediate financial crisis needed to be addressed, but any solution had to be structured to prevent Richard from diverting additional funds while preserving the viability of legitimate business operations. I'll need 24 hours to formulate a response, I told her. In the meantime, please don't discuss this meeting with Richard or anyone else at Harrington Properties. Cite normal confidentiality protocols if asked. And if Richard requests additional fund transfers, route all such requests through your standard approval protocols. Document everything. If pressed, explain that you're adhering to the company's financial governance procedures. Patricia gathered her materials, appearing relieved to have shared her concerns, but still visibly worried about the unresolved financial crisis. 24 hours, then. After she departed, Maria turned to me. The situation is worse than we thought. Richard isn't just planning to leave with your joint savings. He's potentially sabotaging the entire family business. No, I corrected. Her. He's leveraging the family business to extract maximum funds before departing. He needs the Providence project to remain viable just long enough to secure the trust disbursement. Then he'll be gone, leaving the subsequent financial collapse for others to handle. What's our next move? I walked to the window, watching the afternoon light cast long shadows across the Boston skyline. 2 parallel tracks. First, we need to secure the legitimate business operations, ensure the contractors get paid and the projects continue without disruption. Second, we need to isolate Richard from any further financial access while gathering additional evidence of his misconduct. The first requires capital, Maria pointed out, at least $8 million immediately. The trust has liquid reserves, designated for emergency business stabilization. As trustee, I can authorize their use under the continuity provisions. And the second? I turned back from the window, my decision made. It's time to meet with Jonathan at the bank. We need to trace every dollar that's flowed through Sunset Horizons and document Richard's misappropriation beyond any possible defense. He'll realize we're on to him as soon as you deploy emergency trust funds, Maria warned. Yes, I acknowledged. But by then, it will be too late for him to change course. The money he's already diverted will be documented. The trust provisions will be activated, and his planned escape to Grand Cayman will become evidence of intent. I checked my watch. Richard believes he has 29 more days to complete his plan. He doesn't realize the countdown has already begun, and it's not working in his favor. My phone buzzed again with another text from Richard. Did you get my message? Need that transfer ASAP. I set the phone aside without responding. The next move would be mine, not his, and it would change everything. Jonathan Caldwell's corner office at First Atlantic Private Bank offered a commanding view of Boston Harbor. As the sun began its descent, casting golden light across the water, the veteran banker reviewed the documents spread before him with increasing concern. This is Troubling, Eleanor, he said finally, removing his reading glasses. Very troubling indeed. I concur, I replied calmly, though the evidence of Richard's financial malfeasance was far beyond troubling. It was devastating, both personally and professionally. The emergency meeting with Jonathan had been arranged within hours of Patricia's revelations. As the Harrington family's primary banking relationship manager for over 2 decades, Jonathan possessed both the institutional knowledge and the authority to assist with the complex financial interventions I was now contemplating. To summarize, Jonathan continued, Richard has diverted approximately $7 million through various channels over the past 4 months. The joint accounts you shared have been systematically drained. Corporate funds have been redirected to this Sunset Horizons entity with no discernible business purpose. And he's leveraged Harrington Properties with commitments predicated on trust disbursements that haven't been authorized. That's an accurate assessment, I confirmed. And you believe he's planning to leave the country before the financial consequences become apparent? The evidence suggests exactly that. 2 first-class tickets to Grand Cayman, departing 6 days from now. An LLC established in a jurisdiction known for banking privacy. Systematic liquidation of accessible assets. The pattern is unambiguous. Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, his expression grave. In 42 years of banking, I've seen similar situations, but never involving a family with your standing in the community. The Harrington name is practically synonymous with Boston development. If this becomes public, the reputational damage would be immense. Which is precisely why we need to act decisively but discreetly, I emphasized. My priority is threefold: secure the legitimate business operations, document the financial misappropriation, and prevent further damage to the Harrington legacy. Jonathan nodded, already thinking through the banking implications. What specific actions are you contemplating? I laid out my strategy methodically. First, immediate collateral verification on all loans made to Harrington Properties. I need to understand exactly what assets Richard has pledged against recent financing. We can provide that by tomorrow morning, Jonathan confirmed. Second, I need to deploy emergency stabilization funds from the trust reserves to address the immediate contractor payment crisis. That will require expedited processing. Jonathan made a note. How much? $7 million allocated. Specifically for verified vendor payments. The funds should be transferred to a new dedicated account with dual authentication requirements. Patricia Whitmore and myself as required signatories. That prevents Richard from accessing or redirecting the funds, Jonathan observed. He won't be pleased. His pleasure is not my concern, I replied evenly. My fiduciary duty is to the trust and its legitimate business interests, not to Richard's personal preferences. And the third action? Jonathan prompted. Complete documentation and freezing of all assets connected to Sunset Horizons, LLC. I need forensic tracing of every dollar that's flowed through that entity. Jonathan's eyebrows rose slightly. That will require court orders unless you have signatory authority. I anticipated that obstacle, I said, withdrawing another document from my portfolio. This is an emergency petition for temporary financial oversight to be filed with the court tomorrow morning. It cites specific trust provisions regarding potential misappropriation of family assets and requests expedited judicial review. The betrayal. Bankers scanned the document, impressed by its thoroughness. This will certainly get the court's attention. Do you believe Richard will contest it? He may try, but the evidence is substantial, and time is not on his side. Even a temporary freeze would prevent any further fund transfers before his planned departure. Jonathan set the petition aside and regarded me thoughtfully. Eleanor, forgive my directness, but there's a personal dimension to this situation. That can't be ignored. Richard is your husband. These actions, while perhaps financially necessary, will effectively end your marriage. I met his gaze steadily. The marriage ended the moment Richard decided to drain our accounts and abandon his responsibilities. I'm simply ensuring that his personal betrayal doesn't destroy a multi-generational family legacy and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. Jonathan nodded, satisfied with my resolve. Very well, I'll initiate the account verifications immediately and prepare the necessary structure for the emergency fund deployment. The documentation will be ready for your review by 9:01 a.m. tomorrow. As our meeting concluded, my phone displayed 5 missed calls from Richard and a series of increasingly agitated text messages. 5:14 p.m. Need to discuss urgent business matter. Call immediately. 5:48 p.m. Where are you? The Providence situation. Needs attention now. 6:22 p.m. Eleanor, this is serious. Call me back. 6:37 p.m. Have you frozen our accounts? Getting security alerts from the bank. 7:01 p.m. Call me right now. The escalating tone confirmed what I had suspected. Richard had discovered the initial account security measures. The controlled professional facade was cracking under pressure, revealing the desperation beneath. I composed a brief, measured response. In meetings regarding potential identity theft issues with our accounts. Very concerning. Will call when finished. The message maintained my pretense of obliviousness while buying critical time to execute the financial containment strategy. Richard's reaction would be telling. The response came almost instantly. Where are you meeting? I'll come to you. Another deflection was necessary. With banking security team, highly technical discussion about unusual transfer patterns. We'll explain everything later tonight. As Maria and I left First Atlantic's offices, the evening sky had darkened to deep indigo. The financial district's buildings glowed with the light of late workers, their windows forming a constellation of illuminated squares against the night. He's getting nervous, Maria observed as we walked to the car. The account freezes have him rattled. As they should, I replied. Richard believed he could operate with impunity, extracting funds without consequences until his planned departure. The sudden resistance has disrupted his timeline. What do you expect him to do next? He'll attempt to access alternative financial resources, business lines of credit, emergency reserves, possibly even personal loans from associates. When those avenues prove insufficient, he'll accelerate his departure plans. The Grand Cayman tickets are for Tuesday, Maria reminded me, 5 days from now. I expect he'll try to move that up to this weekend once he realizes the extent of the financial constraints we're implementing. My phone rang. Richard again. This time I answered. Eleanor, finally! His voice carried forced casualness underlaid with tension. What's going on with our accounts? It's the strangest thing, I replied, matching his tone with practiced confusion. The bank's security team contacted me about suspicious transfer patterns. Apparently, there have been numerous large withdrawals while I was traveling. They've implemented temporary security protocols while they investigate potential identity theft. A pause. Did you authorize these security measures? Of course. Wouldn't you? The activity patterns apparently match known fraud indicators. The bank is just being thorough. Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear him calculating his response, weighing how much to reveal against how much I might already know. These security measures are creating problems with some time-sensitive business transactions, he said finally. I need you to contact the bank and have the restrictions lifted immediately. Richard, they're investigating potential financial crimes. I can't simply demand they stop because it's inconvenient. That would look suspicious, wouldn't it? His frustration was palpable even through the phone. This is interfering with Harrington Properties operations. We have critical vendor payments pending. The company accounts should be unaffected. I noted innocently. This only involves our personal finances. There are interconnected transactions, he said carefully. Temporary capital allocations that need to be reconciled. That sounds concerning, I replied, maintaining my facade of helpful confusion. Perhaps we should meet with Patricia to review these interconnected transactions? I'm sure she could help clarify the appropriate financial governance procedures. The mention of Patricia, who Richard didn't yet know had already spoken with me, caused another telling silence. That won't be necessary, he said finally. Just contact the bank first thing tomorrow and have the security holds removed. I'll handle the business side. I'll do my best, I assured him. Though the security team mentioned the investigation might take several days to complete. Apparently, some of the transfers were quite sophisticated. Days? Richard's composure slipped noticeably. That's completely unacceptable. These are our accounts, Eleanor. We should have immediate access. I agree it's frustrating, but financial security is paramount, isn't it? We wouldn't want unauthorized persons accessing our funds. The irony of my statement hung in the air between us. Richard, of course, was the unauthorized person who had been systematically draining our accounts, a fact he didn't yet realize I had documented extensively. When will you be home? He asked abruptly, changing tactics. I have another meeting regarding the security issues, then I'll be back. Don't wait up. This might take a while. I'll wait, he insisted. We need to discuss this situation thoroughly. Of course, I agreed pleasantly. I'm as concerned as you are about protecting our finances. After ending the call, I turned to Maria. He's coming home tonight, earlier than planned. That's unexpected. Are you sure you want to be there? I nodded. Absolutely. It's essential to maintain the appearance of normalcy while our legal countermeasures take effect. If I suddenly changed my behavior or location, it would alert him to my awareness. It could be uncomfortable, Maria warned. Or worse. Richard isn't physically dangerous, I assured her. His weapon has always been manipulation, not intimidation. Besides, the house security system records everything. His behavior tonight will simply become additional documentation for our case. We reached my car and I handed Maria a USB drive. This contains all the emergency authorization codes for the trust management systems. If anything unexpected happens, you have full authority to execute the contingency protocols we discussed. Maria accepted it solemnly. Nothing unexpected will happen, but I'll keep this secure. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp at the office. We'll finish preparing the court filings before my 9 a.m. meeting with Jonathan. As Maria departed, I sat in my car momentarily, preparing myself for the confrontation to come. Richard would be desperate to restore his access to funds, increasingly aware that his carefully constructed extraction plan was faltering. He would employ every manipulative tactic in his considerable arsenal tonight: charm, gaslighting, misdirection, perhaps even genuine-seeming contrition. But unlike previous times when Richard had skillfully navigated challenging situations, tonight would be different. Tonight, I possessed something he didn't: complete information. The evidence of his betrayal was meticulously documented. The financial safeguards were being systematically implemented. The legal countermeasures were prepared for filing. I started the car and headed home, mentally rehearsing the performance I would deliver. Concerned wife, puzzled by banking security issues, entirely unaware of her husband's imminent abandonment plans. It would be my most challenging role yet, playing ignorant while setting in motion the mechanisms that would ultimately reveal everything. As I drove through Boston's evening traffic, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock and pain of Richard's betrayal had been methodically channeled into strategic action. The trustee mindset that had served me professionally for years was now protecting me personally. Richard had severely underestimated both my capabilities and my resolve, a miscalculation that would cost him everything he thought he had secured. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan: "Emergency protocols initiated. All systems secure." The pieces were in place. The countdown had begun. And Richard, still believing he controlled the narrative, had no idea that his carefully constructed extraction plan was already crumbling beneath him. I pulled into our driveway, noting Richard's car already parked in its usual spot. Taking a deep breath, I prepared to face my husband, the man who had shared my bed while plotting to desert, me, who had drained our accounts while planning his escape with another woman, who had leveraged a family legacy for personal gain. Tonight would be a masterclass in controlled restraint. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of consequences. And in 29 days, at the trust disbursement meeting, would come the final reckoning that Richard never saw coming. The house was unnaturally quiet when I entered, the grand foyer dimly lit with only the accent lighting illuminating the artwork on the walls, pieces we had carefully selected together during weekend trips to galleries in New York and London. How strange that objects chosen in moments of apparent harmony could now silently witness such profound betrayal. I set my briefcase and keys on the entrance table, the soft sound echoing slightly in the stillness. The security system chimed, quietly as I disabled it with my personal code. A code I had already arranged to have changed tomorrow, though Richard didn't know that yet. Eleanor. Richard's voice came from the darkness of the living room. He hadn't turned on the lights, an unusual choice that seemed calculated for dramatic effect. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out his silhouette seated in his favorite leather armchair, a tumbler of what was undoubtedly expensive scotch in his hand. "Richard," I replied evenly, maintaining my composed facade, "I didn't expect you back until Sunday." "Clearly." He took a slow sip from his glass. "Yet here I am." I moved toward the light switch, but Richard's voice stopped me. "Leave it. I prefer the ambiance." Theatrics. Richard had always had a flair for the dramatic, particularly when setting a scene for difficult conversations. In our early years together, I had found this quality charming, the mark of someone who understood the importance of presentation and atmosphere. Now I recognized it as a manipulation tactic, an attempt to control the emotional tenor of our interaction. "How was Toronto?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Productive," I answered, setting my purse aside and taking a seat on the sofa across from him. The panel discussion on fiduciary responsibility was particularly relevant. "Fiduciary responsibility," Richard repeated, a hint of something dark coloring his voice. "An interesting area of expertise." "It's quite literally my profession, Richard." He leaned forward slightly, the ice in his glass clinking. "Tell me about these suspicious transfers the bank is investigating." "I don't have many details." "Yet," I replied, manufacturing a concerned expression. "Apparently, there have been numerous substantial withdrawals from our joint accounts over the past several weeks. The patterns triggered the bank's security algorithms. And naturally, you authorized a complete freeze on our finances without consulting me." "I authorized standard security protocols based on the bank's recommendation," I corrected him. It seemed the prudent response to potential identity theft. "Wouldn't you have done the same?" Richard studied me carefully, searching for signs of knowledge beyond what I claimed. Finding none, I had spent years perfecting my professional poker face in high-stakes negotiations. He shifted tactics. "The timing is exceptionally problematic," he said, setting his glass down with deliberate precision. "Harrington Properties has critical payment obligations that cannot be delayed. These security measures are creating a genuine business crisis." I tilted my head slightly, the picture of wifely concern. "I don't understand. How would our personal account security affect company operations? Surely the corporate accounts are separate." Richard's jaw tightened momentarily, a tell I recognized from countless dinner parties when conversations veered into territory he found challenging. "There are temporary fund allocations between accounts to optimize cash flow. Standard practice." "Is it?" I asked innocently. "That sounds unusual from a corporate governance perspective. Does Patricia approve of these allocations?" The mention of Patricia's name caused a barely perceptible flinch. Patricia handles her responsibilities. I handle mine. Of course, I conceded smoothly. I'm just surprised that corporate operations would be affected by our personal banking issues. It seems like an unnecessary business risk. Richard stood abruptly, moving to the bar cart to refill his glass. The controlled movement couldn't quite mask his growing agitation. Your concern is noted, but unnecessary. I simply need you to contact the bank tomorrow and have these security measures lifted. Immediately. I'll certainly try, I assured him, though the fraud investigation team mentioned it could take several days to complete their review. Days? The word escaped with barely suppressed fury before he regained his composure. That's unacceptable. These are our accounts, Eleanor. Our money. Our jointly held assets, I clarified gently, which is precisely why protecting them from unauthorized access is so important. Richard turned to face me, his expression hardening. Are you implying something? Not at all, I replied calmly. I'm simply emphasizing the importance of security for shared financial resources. I'm sure you agree. The tension between us stretched like an overwound spring. Richard was calculating his next move, weighing how much to reveal against how much I might already know. I maintained my expression of mild concern mixed with confusion, revealing nothing of the extensive, countermeasures already in motion. You seem different, he said finally, studying me with narrowed eyes. Different how? I can't quite place it, he admitted, the first genuine statement of our conversation. There's something in your manner. I offered a tired smile. It's been a long day, Richard. Identity theft concerns on top of a demanding conference schedule would affect anyone's demeanor. He nodded slowly, apparently accepting this explanation. When did you first notice these suspicious transfers? I didn't notice them at all, I answered truthfully. The bank's security team contacted me directly. Apparently, the withdrawal patterns matched known fraud indicators. And what exactly did they tell you about these patterns? Multiple large transfers during a short time frame, unusual destination accounts, transactions occurring while I was traveling, standard red, flags for potential account compromise. Richard took another sip of his scotch, his expression unreadable. And it didn't occur to you that I might have legitimate reasons for these transfers? The amounts in question were substantial, Richard, hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you had legitimate plans for such significant withdrawals, wouldn't you have mentioned them? His eyes met mine, calculating. Sometimes business opportunities require discretion and quick action. Business opportunities, I repeated softly. Through our personal accounts rather than company channels? The line between personal and business finance is often fluid for entrepreneurs, he replied dismissively. Not everything fits neatly into compartmentalized structures. The audacity was breathtaking. He was actually attempting to normalize the systematic draining of our joint accounts, recasting theft as entrepreneurial flexibility. I see, I said, allowing a hint of confusion to color my tone. Well, I'm sure the bank's investigation will clarify everything quickly. In the meantime, we should probably review our financial positions to ensure we can manage household expenses until the security holds are lifted. Richard waved this concern away. I've made alternative arrangements for immediate needs. My primary concern is addressing the business payment obligations that can't be postponed. Which obligations specifically? I asked, pressing gently. His expression tightened. The Providence development has contractor payments due next week. Significant amounts that must be processed on schedule to avoid construction delays. How significant? Several million, he admitted reluctantly. The exact figures are detailed in the project documentation. I nodded thoughtfully. That does sound pressing. Perhaps we should meet with Patricia tomorrow to review the situation. As CFO, She'd have the most comprehensive understanding of the payment requirements and available options. The suggestion visibly unsettled him. That won't be necessary. I'll handle the financial arrangements. But if the payments are as critical as you suggest, wouldn't a coordinated approach be more efficient? I have experience with complex financial structures that might prove useful. Richard set his glass down with careful precision. Your expertise in trust management is noted, Eleanor, but Harrington Properties remains my operational domain. I'll address the Providence situation through appropriate corporate channels. The statement hung between us, his assertion of separate territories, his attempt to maintain the walls between our professional worlds. If only he knew how thoroughly those walls had already been breached. As you wish, I conceded, rising from my seat. It's been a long day, and tomorrow will likely be consumed with resolving these banking issues. I think I'll retire for the night. Richard remained seated, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Something's different, he said again, almost to himself. I paused at the doorway. Good night, Richard. I hope whatever's troubling you resolves itself soon. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I heard the distinct sound of a glass being hurled against the fireplace, followed by muttered curses. The controlled facade was cracking under pressure. Richard was realizing that his carefully constructed extraction plan was encountering unexpected resistance, and his frustration was manifesting physically. In our bedroom, I changed into nightclothes and prepared for bed with methodical calm. My secure phone showed notifications from both Maria and Jonathan, confirming that all planned financial containment measures were proceeding on schedule. By morning, Richard's ability to access or move significant funds would be severely constrained. I heard him pacing in his study down the hall, making phone calls in hushed, urgent tones. Fragments of conversation drifted through the house. Alternative funding sources, temporary liquidity constraints, accelerated timeline. He was scrambling to salvage his escape plan, unaware that each desperate maneuver was being monitored and documented. Eventually, Richard entered the bedroom, his movements betraying the tension he was working to conceal. He undressed silently and slipped into bed, maintaining a careful distance between us, the physical manifestation of the gulf that had opened in our marriage. Eleanor, he said finally, his voice carefully modulated. I may need to travel again. Tomorrow. Urgent business matters require personal attention. Of course, I replied softly, feigning sleepiness. Your business responsibilities come first. They always have. The subtle barb wasn't lost on him. A long silence followed before he spoke again. You've always understood the demands of building something significant, he said, attempting a conciliatory tone. Few people appreciate the sacrifices required. Indeed, I agreed. Sacrifices should serve a purpose greater than oneself. That's what differentiates sacrifice from exploitation. Richard had no response to this philosophical distinction. Eventually, his breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, or at least the pretense of it. I lay awake, reviewing tomorrow's strategic moves and contingency plans. In the darkness, I allowed myself a moment of reflection on the man lying beside me. The husband who had shared my life for 7 years while secretly plotting his exit. Who had drained our joint resources while planning a future with another. Woman who had leveraged family assets for personal gain with no regard for the consequences. Tomorrow would begin the formal process of holding him accountable. The legal filings would be submitted. The financial evidence would be preserved. The trust protections would be activated. Richard believed he had 29 more days to complete his extraction and disappearance. In reality, his time had already run out. I closed my eyes, finding unexpected peace in the clarity of purpose that had emerged from betrayal. Richard had forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, exactly who he had married. By morning, the process of reminding him would begin in earnest. Morning arrived with the soft chime of my alarm at 5:30 a.m. I opened my eyes to find Richard's side of the bed already empty, unusual for a man who typically treasured his sleep until at least 7. The sound of the shower running in the guest bathroom downstairs suggested he was deliberately avoiding our shared space, another telling indicator of his mindset. Perfect. His absence would simplify my own preparations. I moved through my morning routine with practiced efficiency, selecting a charcoal gray Armani suit that I reserved for high-stakes negotiations. The subtle power dressing was intentional. Today would require every advantage, including psychological ones. My secure phone displayed several overnight notifications. From Jonathan. Emergency Trust Fund deployment processed. Dual authentication. Protocols active as of 4 a.m. From Maria. Court filings prepared. Judge Harriman assigned to review. 9:30 a.m. preliminary hearing confirmed. From Patricia. Urgent situation with Providence contractors. Are attempting to redirect payment channels. Awaiting your guidance. The last message was concerning, but not unexpected. Richard was clearly working to circumvent the financial controls we had begun implementing. His desperation would only increase as additional barriers manifested throughout the day. I responded to Patricia first. Maintain standard payment protocols. Reference pending audit requirements if pressed. New funding structure will be communicated by 10 a.m. As I finished dressing, I heard the front door close. Through the bedroom window, I watched Richard hurry to his car, his movements betraying his agitation. He was leaving early, presumably to pursue those alternative funding sources he had been discussing on the phone last night. I waited until his car disappeared down the street before making my own departure. No need for another confrontation before all pieces were in position. At 7:45 a.m., I arrived at my office to find Maria already waiting, a spread of documents organized across the conference table. "Good morning," she greeted me, professional as always despite the extraordinary circumstances. "How was your evening?" "With Richard?" "Illuminating," I replied, setting down my briefcase. "He's definitely panicking, though trying to conceal it. He made 3 calls after midnight to various financial contacts, presumably seeking liquidity from alternative sources." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You had his calls monitored?" "Not actively. Our home security system logs all communications for security purposes, a feature Richard insisted upon but apparently forgot about in his current distraction." "Convenient," Maria observed with the ghost of a smile. "The emergency petition is ready for your final review. Judge Harriman was specifically selected for his background in trust law and his reputation for discretion in high-profile cases." I reviewed the legal filing, making minor adjustments to strengthen certain language. The petition outlined the evidence of financial misconduct, the imminent risk of asset dissipation, and the trustee's authority to implement protective measures. It requested temporary restraining orders on all accounts associated with Richard Harrington and Sunset Horizons, LLC, pending a full hearing. "Has Richard made any attempts to access the trust accounts directly?" I asked, signing the final page. 3 attempts overnight, all rejected by the security protocols. He also called the Trust Administration office at 6:15 this morning, demanding immediate disbursement authorization. On what grounds? Urgent business requirements necessitating capital infusion. The request was documented and politely deferred to the trustee, you, as per standard protocols. I nodded, satisfied that the institutional guardrails were functioning as designed. And the Providence contractor situation? Maria pulled up relevant documentation on her tablet. Richard instructed the project management team to redirect payment authorizations through a new approval channel, himself and Melanie Crane as dual signatories, bypassing Patricia and the standard financial governance structure. Bold, I remarked, and entirely outside corporate governance protocols. Has he succeeded in implementing this change? No. The system requires CFO authorization for modification of payment channels. Patricia has encountered technical difficulties processing his request. Excellent. That buys us the time we need. I checked my watch. The court hearing is in 90 minutes. Before that, I need to speak with William's former attorney. George Harrington III, no relation to the Harrington family despite the name similarity, had served as William's personal attorney for over 30 years before his retirement. Though no longer actively practicing, he retained unique insights into William's intentions regarding the family trust structure. At 8:15 a.m., George welcomed me into his home office, a book-lined sanctuary in his Cambridge residence. At 78, he remained sharp-minded and direct. "Eleanor," he greeted me, his handshake firm despite his age. "Your message suggested urgency. How can I assist?" I explained the situation concisely, outlining Richard's actions and my planned response. George listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. "William anticipated this," he said finally, rising to retrieve a file from his personal safe. Not the specific circumstances, but the potential for Richard to prioritize personal interests over family legacy. He handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. "William instructed me to provide this to you if Richard ever attempted to circumvent the trust structures or misappropriate family assets. It's a letter documenting his concerns and explicitly reinforcing your authority as trustee to take whatever corrective actions you deem necessary." The document was a powerful reinforcement of my legal position, William's own words providing context and support for the precise measures I was now implementing. "Thank you, George. This will be invaluable." "William valued two things above all else," the elderly attorney said as he walked me to the door. "The Harrington legacy and people of integrity. He saw both in you, which is why he structured the trust as he did. Richard never fully appreciated his father's wisdom in this regard." At 9:25 a.m., Maria and I arrived at the courthouse for the emergency hearing. The proceedings had been arranged with unusual privacy, the case docket number obscured to minimize public attention. Judge Harriman, a distinguished jurist with salt-and-pepper hair and penetrating eyes, reviewed the petition with careful attention to detail. "Mrs. Harrington," he addressed me directly after examining the evidence, "the documentation you've provided indicates systematic financial misconduct and imminent risk of further asset dissipation. As trustee of the Harrington family trust, you've acted within your fiduciary authority to implement protective measures. This court finds sufficient cause to grant the temporary restraining orders as requested, pending a full evidentiary hearing." He signed the orders with deliberate precision. "These restraining orders will take effect immediately upon filing. All financial institutions named in the petition are hereby directed to freeze the specified accounts and preserve all transaction records." The court further directs that copies of these orders be served on Richard Harrington and Melanie Crane without delay. By 10:15 a.m., the orders had been filed and electronic notifications dispatched to all relevant financial institutions. The legal vice was tightening, though Richard remained unaware of its full extent. My next stop was First Atlantic Private Bank, where Jonathan awaited with confirmation of the emergency trust fund deployment. "The $7 million has been transferred to the secure contractor payment account," he reported. "Dual authentication protocols are active, requiring both your approval and Patricia Whitmore's for any disbursements. We've also completed the collateral verification on Harrington Properties loans." "And?" Jonathan's expression tightened. "Richard has overextended significantly. The Providence development is leveraged at nearly 85% of projected value, well beyond industry standards and the bank's normal lending parameters. He secured the additional funding through personal guarantees backed by anticipated trust disbursements." "Guarantees he had no authority to make," I noted. "Precisely. From a banking perspective, this creates significant risk exposure. If those trust disbursements don't materialize as he's represented, The loan covenants would trigger immediate default clauses. I understand the implications, I assured him. My priority remains protecting legitimate business operations while addressing Richard's misconduct. The contractors need to be paid, and the projects need to continue without disruption. Jonathan nodded. The dual authentication structure accomplishes that objective. Patricia can verify legitimate vendor invoices, and your approval ensures appropriate fund allocation. As we finished our meeting, my phone registered an incoming call from an unexpected source, Melanie Crane. After a moment's consideration, I decided to answer. Eleanor Harrington speaking. Mrs. Harrington. Melanie's voice carried a forced professional tone underlaid with clear anxiety. I'm calling regarding some concerning financial disruptions affecting Harrington Properties operations. Indeed, I replied neutrally. What sort of disruptions? There appear to be irregularities with certain payment authorizations and account access. As Mr. Harrington's executive assistant, I'm attempting to resolve these issues and wondered if you might have relevant information. The carefully worded inquiry revealed volumes about Melanie's current position. She was trying to determine how much I knew while maintaining plausible deniability about her own involvement. How interesting that you would contact me about corporate financial matters, Ms. Crane. As you're aware, my professional role involves trust management, not Harrington Properties operations. A pause. Yes, of course. It's just that some of these issues seem to involve trust-related authorizations, and Mr. Harrington suggested you might have insights. Did he? I allowed a hint of curiosity to color my tone. That's rather surprising, given that Richard has always maintained strict separation between corporate operations and trust administration. Perhaps you could clarify exactly which authorizations are causing concern? Another pause, longer this time. The specific details are probably best discussed directly with Mr. Harrington. I apologize for any inappropriate intrusion into trust matters. No apology necessary, I assured her smoothly. In fact, I'd be happy to address any questions regarding trust administration. Perhaps we could meet in person? Say, tomorrow morning at my office? We could review any concerning authorizations together. The invitation was deliberate, an opportunity to assess Melanie's level of knowledge and potentially separate her from Richard's influence. I would need to check Mr. Harrington's schedule, she hedged, though tomorrow might be difficult, given some upcoming travel commitments. Yes. The Grand Cayman trip scheduled for Tuesday, I said casually. First-class tickets for two, I believe? How lovely. Though the timing seems potentially problematic, given the Providence payment situation you mentioned. The shocked silence that followed confirmed what I had suspected. Melanie hadn't anticipated my knowledge of their travel plans. I'm not sure what you're referring to, she managed finally, her voice noticeably less composed. No? How curious. Well, if your schedule permits, my offer for a meeting remains open. Otherwise, I imagine we'll have opportunity to discuss these matters during the trust disbursement review. Though that would be after your planned departure date, wouldn't it? Without waiting for her response, I continued pleasantly. Please do give Richard my regards when you speak with him. Mention that I've been in touch with Patricia regarding the Providence contractor payments. I'm sure he'll be relieved to know those financial arrangements are being addressed. I ended the call before she could recover her composure, immediately, texting Maria. Melanie made contact, fishing for information about account restrictions, clearly rattled when I mentioned Grand Cayman tickets. Expect Richard to escalate dramatically when she reports back to him. The strategic revelation of my knowledge about their travel plans was calculated to accelerate the timeline. Richard would now realize that his extraction plan had been discovered, forcing him to make increasingly desperate moves that would further document his intentions. At 11:30 a.m., I reached Patricia at Harrington Properties to coordinate the contractor payment structure. The situation has intensified, she reported. Richard is attempting to redirect project funds through alternative channels. He's also called an emergency executive meeting for 1 p.m. today. Will you attend? Yes, though I'm increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of his instructions. He explicitly directed me to identify creative financing solutions, regardless of standard corporate governance constraints. Document everything, I advised her. The dual authentication payment system is now active. We'll process legitimate contractor invoices through that structure, ensuring project continuity while maintaining appropriate controls. Patricia's relief was audible. Thank you. This preserves both the projects and my professional integrity. By noon, the financial containment strategy was fully implemented. All accounts associated with Richard Harrington and Sunset Horizons had been frozen pursuant to court order. The emergency trust funds had been secured with dual authentication requirements. The legal documentation of Richard's misconduct was preserved and filed with appropriate authorities. The trap was set. Now we would see how Richard responded when he discovered just how thoroughly his extraction plan had been dismantled and who had orchestrated its unraveling. My phone chimed with an incoming text from Richard. We need to talk, immediately. Meeting you at your office. 12:30. The confrontation was imminent. I straightened my desk, reviewed the key documentation one final time, and prepared to reveal what Richard had fatally miscalculated, that the wife he had planned to abandon was the same trustee who controlled every dollar of the fortune he had attempted to exploit. Richard arrived at my office building at 12:27 p.m., 3 minutes ahead of his self-declared meeting time. Through the security monitors, I watched him stride across the lobby with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms and intimidating opponents. His tailored navy suit and perfect Windsor knot presented the image he had carefully cultivated: successful, authoritative, in control. It would be the last time he entered my professional space believing himself to hold the upper hand. I instructed my assistant to escort him directly to my private conference room rather than my personal office, a deliberate choice to establish a more formal setting for what was about to unfold. Maria was already positioned there, ostensibly reviewing documents but actually ensuring all recording systems were functioning properly. Every word and gesture of the impending confrontation would be preserved. At precisely 12:30 p.m., Richard entered the conference room, his expression darkening momentarily at the sight of Maria. I need to speak with my wife. Privately, he announced, the expectation of immediate compliance evident in his tone. Maria is preparing documentation relevant to our discussion, I replied calmly from my seat at the head of the conference table. Her presence is necessary. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Eleanor, this is a personal matter. Is it? I raised an eyebrow slightly. Your text suggested an urgent conversation. Given recent events, I assumed it would involve financial matters that might benefit from my associate's expertise. Richard's calculated gaze assessed the situation, likely weighing the benefits of forcing the issue against the time it would. Waste. Efficiency won out. Fine, he conceded, taking a seat directly across from me. We can speak frankly in front of your associate. The slight pause before the last word carried a dismissive edge that didn't escape my notice. I folded my hands on the table, my expression professionally neutral. What can I help you with, Richard? His response was immediate and direct. I need you to explain why our accounts are frozen, why Harrington Properties payment systems are suddenly requiring dual authentication, and why I've received notification of emergency court filings naming me as a respondent. So he had already discovered the full scope of the morning's legal and financial interventions. Interesting. Someone at the bank or courthouse had alerted him faster than anticipated. Those are substantial questions, I acknowledged. Let's address them systematically. Richard leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. Let's not play games, Eleanor. Something is happening, and I want to know exactly what you think you're doing. What I'm doing? I repeated thoughtfully. is fulfilling my fiduciary responsibilities as trustee of the Harrington Family Trust while protecting joint assets from unauthorized dissipation. The specific mechanisms you've mentioned are standard protective measures implemented in response to documented financial misconduct. The clinical precision of my answer seemed to momentarily throw him off balance. He had clearly expected either ignorance or emotion, not this calm professional assessment. Financial misconduct? His tone carried practiced outrage. What are you talking about? I signaled to Maria, who promptly opened a leather portfolio and began laying documents on the table between us. Bank statements, transfer records, incorporation, papers for Sunset Horizons, LLC, Grand Cayman flight confirmations, and hotel reservations. Over the past 4 months, I began, my voice measured and methodical, you have systematically transferred approximately $37 million from our joint accounts to various destinations, culminating in the recently established Sunset Horizons entity. Concurrently, you have overextended Harrington Properties through unsanctioned loan guarantees predicated on trust disbursements that were never authorized. These actions, combined with your planned departure to Grand Cayman with Melanie Crane, constitute clear evidence of intent to misappropriate assets and abandon financial responsibilities. As each document was placed before him, I watched Richard's expression shift from controlled anger to something more complex. Surprise tinged with the first flickers of genuine concern. "You've been investigating me?" he said finally, his voice lowered. "Spying on your own husband." "Documenting financial irregularities affecting shared assets," I corrected him. A responsibility that became necessary when those irregularities demonstrated clear patterns of intentional misconduct. Richard's strategy shifted, his expression softening into the charming smile that had won over countless business partners and social connections. "Eleanor, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. These financial movements represent legitimate business strategies, complex arrangements that might appear unusual without proper context." "Indeed?" I kept my tone neutral. "Please provide that context. Explain the business purpose behind emptying our joint savings during my absence. Clarify the legitimate corporate function of Sunset Horizons, LLC. Elucidate the strategic rationale for first-class tickets to a banking haven known for its privacy laws." Richard's smile faltered slightly. Business opportunities often require flexibility and discretion. "Richard," I interrupted gently, "let's not insult each other's intelligence. We both know exactly what these financial movements represent. The only misunderstanding was yours, specifically, your fundamental misconception about who controls the Harrington family fortune." I withdrew William Harrington's letter from my portfolio and placed it before him. "Your father anticipated the possibility that you might prioritize personal interests over family legacy. He structured the trust accordingly, with explicit provisions regarding misappropriation of assets and breach of fiduciary duty." Richard's confidence visibly wavered as he scanned his father's handwritten letter, the familiar script spelling out contingencies specifically designed to constrain the behaviors he had been exhibiting. "This changes nothing," he said finally, pushing the letter aside with forced dismissiveness. "The trust disbursement is scheduled, the funds are allocated, the projects are underway." "Ah," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "That's where your misunderstanding becomes most apparent. The trust disbursement isn't an automatic process, Richard. It requires trustee review and approval based on specific criteria outlined in the trust documents, criteria that include demonstrable financial responsibility and adherence to fiduciary principles." Richard's expression hardened. "And you're the trustee?" "I've been the trustee for 5 years," I confirmed, "appointed directly by your father before his passing. The position you dismissed as administrative paperwork actually carries complete discretionary authority over trust distributions." The implications of this revelation visibly registered across Richard's features. A cascading realization that the financial resources he had counted on accessing, the fortune he had leveraged against multiple business commitments, remained entirely under my control. "You can't simply withhold disbursements," he argued, though his tone betrayed uncertainty. "The business operations depend on that funding. Hundreds of employees would be affected. Which is precisely why emergency stabilization measures have already been implemented," I explained calmly. "The legitimate business operations will continue uninterrupted. Contractors will be paid. Projects will proceed. The Harrington legacy will be preserved." I leaned forward slightly. "What won't continue, however, is your unrestricted access to family assets. The court has granted temporary restraining orders freezing all accounts associated with you and Sunset Horizons. All trust disbursements will require enhanced verification and documentation moving forward. And all financial improprieties have been thoroughly documented for potential further legal action." Richard's composure finally cracked. "You had no right." "I had every right," I corrected him firmly. "As trustee, as joint account holder, and as the spouse you plan to abandon after draining our shared resources. The rights are explicitly documented in multiple legal frameworks that you apparently never bothered to read." The conference room fell silent as Richard processed the full implications of his position. The carefully constructed extraction plan had collapsed. The financial resources he had counted on accessing were now beyond his reach. The escape he had meticulously arranged with Melanie was rapidly becoming impossible. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "What I want is irrelevant to your current situation," I replied. "Your options, however, are relevant and limited. Specifically, you have two potential paths forward." I signaled to Maria, who produced another set of documents. "Option 1, I continued, involves your full cooperation with a comprehensive accounting of all diverted funds, immediate resignation from operational control of Harrington Properties, and a negotiated separation agreement that preserves business continuity while addressing your financial misconduct." "And option 2? Richard's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. "Option 2 involves contested litigation, potential criminal charges for financial improprieties, public disclosure of your planned abandonment and complete isolation from Harrington family assets pending final legal determinations." I allowed him a moment to absorb these alternatives before adding, "The first option preserves some dignity and provides a structured exit. The second ensures mutual destruction, though with significantly greater consequences for you given the documented evidence." Richard's gaze darted between the documents before him, his mind visibly calculating odds and outcomes as he had done countless times in business negotiations. "You've thought of everything," he said finally, a reluctant note of acknowledgement in his voice. "Not everything," I corrected him. "Just the relevant contingencies. A thorough approach to risk management that you might have appreciated had you viewed me as a partner rather than an accessory to be discarded." His expression darkened at this assessment. "You don't understand the pressures I've been under." "Actually, I understand them precisely," I interrupted. "The Providence development is 85% leveraged against projected values. The Hartford project is behind schedule and over budget. The Newport renovation has encountered permitting issues that threaten its completion timeline. You've personally guaranteed loans predicated on trust disbursements you cannot insure. And you've pursued a relationship with your executive assistant that you believed offered an escape from these mounting pressures." Richard's composure slipped further, surprise flickering across his features. "You know about Melanie." "Of course I know about Melanie," I replied evenly. "The Grand Cayman reservations are in both your names. The Sunset Horizons LLC lists both of you as signatories. The hotel confirmations specify a single suite. These aren't the arrangements of colleagues sharing a business trip." His gaze dropped momentarily, the closest thing to shame I'd seen from him since this began. "It wasn't. It didn't start the way you might think." The origin story of your affair doesn't interest me, I said, my tone professional despite the personal nature of the topic. Its relevance to our current situation lies solely in establishing your intent to abandon existing commitments, including our marriage. Richard ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture of genuine discomfort. What happens now? Now you make a choice, I replied, gesturing toward the documents Maria had prepared. Option 1 or Option 2, cooperative resolution or contested litigation. The decision is yours, though I would recommend consulting independent legal counsel before proceeding. You expect me to simply surrender everything I've built? I expect you to acknowledge reality, I corrected him. Harrington Properties was built by generations before you. The current projects are leveraged against trust assets you don't control, and your personal financial position has been compromised by your own actions. Surrender implies you have viable alternatives. You don't. The weight of this assessment seemed to settle on him physically. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Richard Harrington was confronting a situation he couldn't charm, manipulate, or intimidate his way through. I need time to consider my options, he said finally. You have 24 hours, I informed him. The temporary restraining orders are already in effect. The contractor payment system has been restructured with dual authentication requirements. Your accounts remain frozen pending further legal determination. I stood, signaling that our meeting had reached its conclusion. One more thing, Richard. Melanie contacted me earlier today, attempting to gather information about the financial restrictions. You might want to consider whether someone who was willing to participate in abandoning a spouse would demonstrate greater loyalty to a paramour when circumstances become challenging. This parting observation struck visibly, adding another dimension to Richard's rapidly deteriorating position. Not only had his financial escape route been severed, but the partner in his planned new life was already demonstrating questionable allegiance. Richard rose slowly, his normally commanding presence diminished by the weight of revelations. You've changed, he said, studying me with a mixture of anger and something that might have been reluctant respect. No, I replied calmly. I've simply revealed capabilities I always possessed. The miscalculation was yours in failing to recognize them, or to consider that the trustee your father appointed might take those responsibilities seriously. As Richard moved toward the door, his customary confidence noticeably absent, I added, one final observation. The Harrington legacy deserves better than what you've demonstrated, Richard. Your father knew that when he structured the trust as he did. Perhaps in time, you'll understand the wisdom of his decision. He paused at the threshold, clearly weighing potential responses, before departing without another word. The soft click of the door closing marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, both in the Harrington family story and in my own life. Maria gathered the documents methodically, her expression professionally neutral despite the personal drama that had unfolded. Do you think he'll opt for cooperative resolution? I considered the question carefully. Eventually, yes. Richard's primary motivations have always been self-preservation and image management. Once he consults competent counsel and understands the overwhelming evidence against him, pragmatism will prevail over pride. And Melanie? A secondary concern, I replied, returning to my desk. Though her loyalty will likely prove as transactional as the relationship itself, when the promised financial rewards fail to materialize, so too will her commitment to their planned future. As Maria departed with the documentation secured, I took a moment to process what had transpired. The confrontation had unfolded largely as anticipated, though Richard's final recognition of my capabilities carried an unexpected weight. Not validation, I'd never sought his approval, but acknowledgement of a fundamental misjudgment that had shaped our entire relationship. He had married a woman he believed he understood, only to discover in the moment of crisis that she possessed depths and strengths he had never bothered to perceive. The trustee he had dismissed as handling mere administrative paperwork had systematically dismantled his extraction plan with precise legal and financial countermeasures. My phone chimed with a message from Patricia. Richard just arrived at Harrington Properties, heading straight to executive meeting room. Appears agitated. How should I proceed? Attend the meeting. Document everything. Maintain standard protocols regardless of emotional pressure, I replied, confident in Patricia's professional judgment. The next 24 hours would be crucial. Richard would either accept the inevitable and pursue cooperative resolution, or he would attempt desperate countermeasures that would only strengthen the legal case against him. Either way, the trajectory was now clear. The Harrington family legacy would be preserved, legitimate business operations would continue, and Richard would face the consequences of choices made with arrogant disregard for responsibilities entrusted to him. I opened my calendar and confirmed my availability for the trust disbursement meeting still scheduled for 28 days from now. The meeting would proceed as planned, though with substantially different outcomes than Richard had anticipated when draining our accounts and planning his escape. The notification of my husband's betrayal had initially arrived as a shocking personal blow. The resolution was emerging as a professional vindication of principles I had long upheld, that legacy carries responsibility, that fiduciary duty transcends personal convenience, and that careful preparation often reveals itself most clearly in moments of crisis. Richard had emptied our accounts for his girlfriend, forgetting who controlled his trust. That miscalculation would define his future in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. The aftermath of Richard's departure from my office unfolded with the predictable chaos of a drowning man grasping at anything that might keep him afloat. By 3 p.m., reports began flowing in from various sources, painting a picture of increasingly desperate maneuvers. Patricia called first, her normally composed voice tight with tension. He's attempting a complete leadership purge. 3 department heads have been called in and summarily dismissed. He's redirecting all financial reporting through Melanie, bypassing standard channels entirely. Is he providing justification for these actions? I asked, making notes as we spoke. Corporate restructuring necessitated by evolving project requirements is the official language. Unofficially, he's telling the executive team that the company is facing a hostile takeover attempt that must be repelled at all costs. I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Richard casting himself as the defender of Harrington Properties against external threats, when he had been systematically preparing to abandon it himself. How is the executive team responding? I inquired. Mixed reactions. Some appear genuinely alarmed by his claims. Others seem skeptical, particularly regarding the sudden nature of this supposed threat. A few have approached me privately with concerns about his erratic behavior. Maintain your position, I instructed. Document all irregular directives. Implement only those that comply with established corporate governance. Cite regulatory requirements if pressed. My next update came from Jonathan at First Atlantic Bank, who reported that Richard had attempted to access emergency credit lines using Harrington Properties assets as collateral. He appeared in person, demanding immediate liquidity for critical business continuity requirements, Jonathan explained. When informed that additional collateral verification would be necessary given recent court filings, he became demonstrably agitated. How agitated? I asked, though I could well imagine. Security was called, Jonathan replied delicately. No physical altercation occurred, but his departure was expedited by professional escort. The image of Richard, always so conscious of appearances, being escorted from his family's long-standing banking institution by security personnel, was a stark illustration of how quickly his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. By 4:30 p.m., Maria reported that Richard had engaged legal counsel, not his usual corporate attorneys, but Martin Bradshaw, an aggressive litigator known for scorched-earth tactics in high-net-worth divorces. Bradshaw has requested all documentation related to the trust structure and court filings, Maria noted. He's suggesting potential emergency motions to challenge the temporary restraining orders. Let him review everything, I replied confidently. The documentation is meticulous, the legal basis sound. Bradshaw specializes in emotional leverage and media manipulation, not trust law. Once he understands the actual legal landscape, he'll advise Richard accordingly. The most concerning update arrived at 5:45 p.m. from Patricia, who called from her car rather than her office, a security precaution that spoke volumes. Richard is attempting to convene an emergency board meeting to remove you as trustee, she reported. He's claiming breach of fiduciary duty, conflict of interest, and weaponization of financial controls for personal vendettas. Interesting strategy, I remarked, though I had anticipated something along these lines. Has he secured board support? He's working the phones aggressively. 3 board members have already contacted me seeking clarification about the financial situation. I've directed them to independently verified documentation rather than offering personal assessment. Perfect approach, I commended her. The facts speak for themselves. Has a formal board meeting been scheduled? Tomorrow, at noon. Richard is pushing for immediate trustee replacement and dissolution of the dual authentication payment structure. I made a note of the timing. Will you attend? I've been specifically uninvited, Patricia replied, her tone suggesting this. Professional exclusion was unprecedented. Richard cited potential conflicts of interest due to my inappropriate communication with external parties. Meaning me, I clarified. Correct. Though as CFO, my attendance at financial governance discussions is typically mandatory under the corporate bylaws. The systematic removal of oversight figures was entirely consistent with Richard's approach to problems. Isolate, control the narrative, eliminate potential resistance. It had served him well in business contexts where his authority was unquestioned. It would prove less effective against the legal and financial safeguards now in place. Your exclusion actually strengthens our position, I assured Patricia. It demonstrates a pattern of attempting to circumvent established governance protocols, behavior directly relevant to the trust provisions regarding financial responsibility. After completing these calls, I convened a strategy session with my legal team to address Richard's predictable countermoves. By 7 p.m., we had prepared comprehensive responses to potential emergency motions, drafted a formal presentation for the board outlining Richard's financial misconduct, and documented the retaliatory personnel actions that had followed our initial protective measures. The emergency board meeting presents both challenge and opportunity, observed Thomas Winters, my lead trust litigation counsel. Richard believes he can leverage board relationships to undermine your trustee position. In reality, he's creating a formal venue where his financial improprieties will be officially documented in board minutes. Precisely, I agreed. The trust structure intentionally separates trustee authority from board influence. Williams specifically designed it to prevent exactly this type of attempted end run around fiduciary safeguards. As our strategy session concluded, my secure phone registered an incoming call from an unexpected source, Melanie Crane. After brief consideration, I decided to answer, motioning for Thomas to remain and activating the recording function. Eleanor? Harrington, I answered neutrally. Mrs. Harrington. Melanie's voice carried a strained formality. I believe we need to speak privately regarding recent developments. I'm currently with legal counsel, I replied. If this concerns trust, matters or ongoing litigation, having representation present would be appropriate. A pause. This is more personal in nature. I see. In that case, perhaps you could clarify the general topic before I determine whether counsel's presence is advisable. Another pause, longer this time. I want to discuss possible resolution paths that might benefit all parties involved. The careful wording suggested coaching, likely from Richard, though possibly from legal advisors. Either way, engaging directly could provide valuable insights into their current strategy. "I'm listening," I said simply. "The current situation has escalated in ways that serve no one's interests," Melanie began, her delivery sounding rehearsed. "Financial restrictions are impacting legitimate business operations. Legal proceedings create unnecessary public exposure. There may be more constructive approaches that address concerns while allowing appropriate business continuity." "Interesting perspective," I commented, particularly from someone who was prepared to leave the country in 5 days with millions in diverted funds. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line confirmed that my direct reference to their escape plan had landed with impact. "That characterization is unfair and inaccurate," she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Is it? The evidence suggests otherwise. Flight confirmations, hotel reservations, the sunset horizons, LLC structure, all meticulously documented and filed with the court." Another pause, this one suggesting consultation with someone else in the room. "Richard believes there's potential for negotiated resolution that preserves dignity for all parties." Richard's beliefs about negotiating positions have proven consistently unreliable, I observed. "His current legal and financial circumstances are consequences of choices he made with full agency. Those choices reflect priorities that appear fundamentally incompatible with his responsibilities to family legacy and business stakeholders." "People make mistakes," Melanie offered, her tone softening. "Moments of poor judgment shouldn't define entire careers or relationships." "I agree entirely," I replied. "Isolated errors rarely warrant severe consequences. Systematic deception sustained over months, however, reveals character and intention rather than momentary lapse. The distinction is meaningful." The conversation was clearly not proceeding as Melanie, or whoever had prompted her call, had anticipated. Her next words confirmed this assessment. "What would it take?" she asked directly, abandoning the carefully crafted script. "To resolve this situation without further escalation?" "Complete financial transparency," I answered without hesitation. "Full restitution of diverted funds. Resignation from operational control of Harrington Properties. Acceptance of trustee oversight regarding all legacy assets." "That's extensive," she responded, clearly taken aback by the directness of my terms. "The misconduct was extensive," I countered. "The response is proportionate." Another muffled consultation occurred before Melanie spoke again. "Richard is concerned that your personal feelings might be influencing professional judgments regarding business operations." "A reasonable concern," I acknowledged, "which is why all decisions are being documented with independent verification, all actions align with explicit trust provisions, and all financial interventions serve legitimate business continuity purposes. My personal feelings about betrayal remain entirely separate from my professional obligations as trustee." The distinction appeared to surprise her. "You're saying this isn't about revenge? This is about fulfilling fiduciary responsibilities, preserving family legacy, and protecting legitimate business interests from misappropriation," I clarified. "Revenge offers momentary satisfaction, but limited constructive outcomes. I'm focused on sustainable solutions that extend beyond emotional catharsis." A long silence followed before Melanie spoke again, her voice noticeably less confident. "I'll convey your position to Richard." "Please do," I replied. "And Melanie?" "A personal observation, entirely separate from legal or financial matters. Individuals who participate in deception often become its next targets when circumstances change. Worth considering as you evaluate your own path forward." After ending the call, Thomas raised an eyebrow. That final comment might have been slightly outside strict professional boundaries. "Perhaps," I conceded, "though sometimes a moment of genuine human connection proves more influential than formal legal positioning. Melanie is both co-conspirator and potential separate actor in this scenario. Creating space for her to reconsider her alignment might prove valuable. As evening descended over Boston, I returned home to find the house empty, Richard apparently having chosen alternative accommodations after our confrontation. The absence of his presence created a strange serenity in spaces that had so recently witnessed tense exchanges and calculated performances. I poured a single glass of wine and moved to the study that had been my private sanctuary within our shared home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the emergency board meeting, potential emergency court motions, perhaps even media attention if Richard pursued a more public strategy. Yet beneath the tactical complexities lay a simple truth that Richard had never fully grasped. The Harrington legacy had always been about more than buildings bearing the family name or profits from development projects. It represented a multi-generational commitment to creating enduring value through principled action. William Harrington had recognized this essential truth when structuring the trust and selecting its trustee. Richard had dismissed it as sentimental constraint on his personal ambitions. The consequence of that fundamental misalignment was now unfolding with the inexorable clarity of long-deferred recognition. My phone chimed with a message from Jonathan. Contingency funds secured, all systems prepared for potential escalation. Scenarios tomorrow. I replied with simple acknowledgement, knowing that whatever countermoves Richard attempted, the financial and legal foundations we had established would hold firm. The husband who had emptied our accounts for his girlfriend had indeed forgotten who controlled his trust, an oversight that would define the conclusion of our shared chapter and the beginning of whatever came next. Morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a well-ordered mind. I awoke at 5:30 a.m., following the same methodical routine that had structured my professional life regardless of personal circumstances. The discipline provided stability amid the turbulence of recent revelations. By 7 a.m., I was reviewing final preparations for the emergency board meeting with Maria and Thomas in my office. The documentation was impeccable. Financial transfers meticulously tracked. Trust provisions clearly articulated. Richard's misconduct comprehensively evidenced. The board composition favors Richard in terms of personal relationships, Thomas E. observed, studying the roster of Harrington Properties directors. 4 of the 7 members were appointed during his tenure as CEO. 2 others have long-standing social connections with him. True, I acknowledged. But board fiduciary duty supersedes personal loyalty. At least it should when confronted with clear evidence of financial impropriety. These aren't merely friends making social judgments. They're directors with legal responsibilities to the company. Maria nodded. The presentation we've prepared leaves little room for ambiguity. Richard's actions are documented with independent verification at every stage. His current attempts to circumvent financial controls only strengthen the case that intervention was necessary. My phone chimed with a message from Patricia. R has been meeting privately with board members since 6 a.m., presenting narrative of trust overreach and temporary marital disagreement being weaponized against legitimate business operations. As expected, I noted, he's attempting to reframe financial misconduct as personal dispute, suggesting business interests are being harmed by trustee intervention. A strategy that falls apart once the board reviews actual documentation, Thomas pointed out. Particularly, the timeline showing trust intervention occurred only after substantial funds had been diverted and escape plans documented. At 9:30 a.m., Patricia called with troubling new information. Security reports that Richard arrived with external IT consultants this morning. They're implementing system changes to override the dual authentication payment protocols. Can they succeed? I asked, though I'd already anticipated such attempts. Temporarily, perhaps, but the banking structures require institutional verification that's beyond their reach. At best, they might create appearance of having restored control, while actual fund access remains restricted. Document everything, I instructed. These override attempts further demonstrate the pattern of attempting to circumvent proper financial governance. By 11:30 a.m., our preparations were complete. The board meeting was scheduled for noon at Harrington Properties headquarters, Richard's chosen terrain for what he clearly viewed as a decisive confrontation. His selection of venue was telling. He believed familiar surroundings and established dynamics would advantage his position. As we gathered our materials to depart, Jonathan called with final confirmation that all financial safeguards remained secure. Richard attempted to contact senior management directly, claiming trustee overreach and requesting emergency protocols be suspended. His requests were documented and directed to appropriate compliance channels. Has he made any further attempts to access credit lines or alternative funding sources? I inquired. Multiple attempts through various channels, Jonathan confirmed, all properly documented and appropriately declined based on the court orders in effect. His frustration is becoming noteworthy within banking circles. Richard's mounting desperation was manifesting as exactly the kind of erratic financial behavior that justified the protective measures in place, a self-reinforcing cycle that strengthened our position with each new attempt to circumvent established controls. We arrived at Harrington Properties headquarters at 11:45 a.m. The imposing glass tower bearing the family name stood as a physical manifestation of the legacy now under threat from within. The reception staff appeared visibly uncomfortable as they processed our visitor badges, clearly aware of the extraordinary tensions permeating the organization. "Mrs. Harrington," the receptionist greeted me with forced professionalism. "Mr. Harrington left instructions that you and your associates should be escorted directly to the executive conference room upon arrival." "Thank you," I replied pleasantly, refusing to reinforce the awkwardness of the situation. We know the way. As we rode the elevator to the executive floor, Thomas reviewed final strategic considerations. Richard will likely attempt to control the narrative immediately, framing this as a marital dispute inappropriately affecting business operations. Our priority is redirecting focus to the documented financial misconduct and its implications for corporate governance. The executive conference room doors were closed when we arrived, suggesting the board was already in session. This procedural irregularity, starting an emergency meeting before all relevant parties were present, was another indicator of Richard's attempt to shape perceptions before contrary evidence could be presented. I knocked once and entered without waiting for response, Maria and Thomas following close behind. The conversation inside ceased abruptly as 7 board members and Richard turned toward our arrival. The tension in the room was palpable, the board members' expressions ranging from discomfort to confusion to carefully masked concern. Richard sat at the head of the table, a seat traditionally reserved for the board chairman rather than the CEO, another small but telling indicator of his approach to governance. His expression shifted rapidly from surprise at our punctual arrival to forced confidence. "Eleanor," he acknowledged with professional coldness, "the board is discussing sensitive operational matters. Your legal representatives aren't authorized participants in this meeting." "My representatives are here in dual capacity," I replied calmly, taking a seat directly opposite him. "Both as advisors regarding the trust, matters explicitly listed on this emergency meeting agenda, and as counsel in ongoing legal proceedings directly relevant to the financial issues under discussion." Bradford Wells, the nominal board chairman displaced from his usual position, cleared his throat awkwardly. "We were just reviewing concerns about certain financial restrictions affecting company operations. Richard has expressed serious reservations about trust interventions in day-to-day business activities." "I'm sure he has," I acknowledged pleasantly, "and I appreciate the board's willingness to consider all perspectives on these complex issues. Before continuing those discussions, I believe it would be beneficial for board members to review some relevant documentation." Without waiting for permission, Maria began distributing comprehensive information packets to each board member: financial records, trust provisions, court filings, and evidence of Richard's systematic fund diversions. "What is this?" demanded Richard, his composure slipping as he realized we had arrived fully prepared to counter his narrative. "This is the factual context necessary for informed board deliberation," I explained, addressing the board rather than Richard. "As directors with fiduciary responsibilities to Harrington Properties, you deserve complete information about the circumstances necessitating recent financial safeguards." Bradford opened his packet, his expression growing increasingly grave as he scanned the first few pages. The other board members followed suit, the room falling into stunned silence as they absorbed evidence of their CEO's extensive financial misconduct. "These materials demonstrate a troubling pattern," I continued. Into the silence. "Systematic diversion of funds to unauthorized entities, personal guarantees against trust assets without proper authorization, planning documents for imminent departure to non-extradition jurisdictions, all occurring while company projects face critical funding shortfalls." Richard attempted to regain control of the narrative. "This is a deliberate mischaracterization of legitimate business activities, presented without context to serve a personal agenda." "The context is provided in full within those documents," I countered evenly. "Complete transaction histories, original bank records, court-verified evidence, independent expert analysis. Nothing presented lacks proper authentication or contextual explanation." Isabella Thornton, the most recently appointed board member and a respected financial governance expert, looked up from the documentation with visible concern. "These Grand Cayman arrangements, and this Sunset Horizons entity, these appear entirely separate from legitimate Harrington Properties operations." "They are indeed separate," I confirmed. "The trust intervention was specifically designed to distinguish between legitimate business operations, which continue with appropriate controls, and unauthorized fund diversions for personal purposes." Richard's expression darkened as he realized the board was engaging directly with the evidence rather than accepting his characterization. This meeting was called to address trust overreach, not to litigate personal matters. "The issues are inseparable," I noted. "The trust's responsibility is protecting family assets while supporting legitimate business operations. When those assets are threatened by misconduct, intervention becomes necessary regardless of the source of threat." Bradford Wells looked up from the documentation, his expression hardening. "Richard, these financial movements appear highly irregular from a corporate governance perspective. The transfers to Sunset Horizons particularly concern me. Substantial funds moving to an entity with no clear business purpose, no operational history, and directly connected to personal travel arrangements. Business structures often require complexity for strategic purposes," Richard argued, though his typical confident delivery was noticeably strained. "The specific arrangements were in developmental stages when they were interrupted by overreaching trust interventions." Isabella Thornton shook her head slightly. "Development stages don't typically involve first-class tickets to banking havens, Richard, nor do they require systematic emptying of personal accounts during a spouse's absence." The directness of her assessment caused several board members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The veneer of business discussion was rapidly falling away, revealing the personal misconduct at the heart of the financial issues. Richard attempted to pivot. "Regardless of how these matters are characterized, the immediate issue remains operational continuity. The dual authentication payment structure is creating critical delays in project funding." "That concern has already been addressed," I informed the board. "Emergency stabilization funds have been deployed with appropriate governance controls. The Providence contractor payments have been processed. Project continuity has been maintained throughout this process." This revelation clearly surprised both Richard and several board members. He had evidently been emphasizing business disruption as his primary argument against trust intervention. "Those funds were deployed without proper CEO authorization," Richard protested. "They were deployed with proper trustee authorization and CFO verification," I corrected. As specified in the original trust documents establishing relationship between family assets and business operations. Documents filed with this board upon their initial execution. Bradford Wells frowned. I don't recall reviewing such documents. They were presented during the transition following William Harrington's passing, I explained. The minutes from that meeting are included in your information packets, including acknowledgement of the trust governance structure. Richard's strategy was unraveling rapidly as board members continued reviewing the comprehensive documentation before them. What he had portrayed as trustee overreach was revealing itself as necessary intervention against documented misconduct. Isabella Thornton addressed me directly. As trustee, what are you proposing regarding ongoing business operations given these concerning financial activities? The Trust's priority remains supporting legitimate Harrington Properties activities while preventing misappropriation of assets, I replied. The dual authentication payment structure accomplishes both objectives, allowing verified business expenses while preventing unauthorized diversions. And Richard's role moving forward? She pressed. Before I could answer, Richard intervened forcefully. My role as CEO is established by board authority, not trust oversight. This meeting was called to address inappropriate financial restrictions, not to question leadership. Bradford Wells looked troubled. Given the severity of issues documented here, leadership questions seem entirely relevant, Richard. The balance was shifting perceptibly as board members continued processing the evidence before them. What Richard had intended as a forum to challenge trust authority was transforming into examination of his own conduct. I propose we adjourn to review these materials more thoroughly, suggested Howard Michaels, a longtime board member and former colleague of William Harrington. This documentation requires careful consideration before we reach determinations about appropriate next steps. Richard recognized the momentum moving against him. These are operational matters requiring immediate resolution. Delay serves no productive purpose. Careful governance serves essential purpose, countered Isabella, particularly when facing evidence of potential misconduct affecting company resources. The emergency meeting Richard had convened to challenge trust authority was concluding, without the decisive outcome he had sought. Instead, board members were requesting time to thoroughly review evidence of his own financial improprieties. As the board prepared to adjourn, I addressed them one final time. The trust remains committed to supporting Harrington Properties' legitimate business activities. The protective measures currently in place are designed specifically to distinguish between proper corporate operations and unauthorized fund diversions. I welcome the board's thoughtful review of these matters and stand ready to address any questions that arise. The professionalism and measured tone of this closing statement contrasted sharply with Richard's increasingly agitated demeanor. The distinction wasn't lost on board members, who departed with troubled expressions and information packets tucked securely under their arms. As the room emptied, Richard remained seated, his expression a complex mixture of anger and dawning recognition that his attempted counter-move had backfired dramatically. The emergency board meeting he had convened to challenge my authority had instead reinforced it, while exposing his misconduct to the very leadership bodies he had hoped to leverage against me. This isn't over, he stated flatly as I gathered my materials to depart. On that point, we agree completely, I replied, though perhaps not in the manner you intended. The aftermath of the board meeting unfolded with the swift intensity of a summer storm. As Maria, Thomas, and I departed Harrington Properties headquarters, Patricia called with alarming news. Richard's implementing a scorched earth protocol, she reported, her voice tight with professional concern. He's directed IT to lock down all financial systems, revoked access credentials for the entire accounting department, and instructed security to escort key financial staff from the building, including me. Are you safe? I asked immediately, signaling to Thomas that we needed to accelerate our next countermeasures. Yes, I anticipated this possibility and secured critical documentation before the meeting. I'm leaving the building now with copied records of all recent irregular directives and transaction attempts. Good. Meet us at my office in 30 minutes, I instructed. We'll implement the contingency plan immediately. Richard's extreme reaction confirmed what I had suspected during the board meeting. He recognized that his position was rapidly deteriorating and was now resorting to increasingly desperate tactics. By removing financial staff and restricting system access, he was attempting to create an information vacuum that might delay further exposure of his activities. As our car navigated Boston traffic, Thomas was already on the phone with Judge Harriman's clerk requesting an emergency hearing based on this new development. Maria simultaneously coordinated with our forensic accounting team to activate backup access protocols for the Harrington Properties financial systems, administrative pathways established years ago by William Harrington as protection against precisely this type of internal disruption. By the time we reached my office, events were accelerating rapidly. Isabella Thornton had called to inform me that several board members had convened an impromptu discussion immediately following the formal meeting. The documentation you provided was illuminating, she said, choosing her words carefully. Several of us have significant concerns about fiduciary responsibilities given what we've learned. Bradford is consulting outside counsel regarding potential board liability if we fail to take appropriate action. A prudent precaution, I acknowledged. The Trust's priority remains protecting legitimate business operations while preventing misappropriation of assets. Those objectives should align with the board's fiduciary obligations. Richard is presenting this as a temporary leadership disagreement that's being magnified by personal factors, Isabella continued. But the financial documentation tells a different story. The systematic nature of the fund movements, combined with the Grand Cayman arrangements. It's difficult to interpret charitably. The Trust has no interest in disrupting legitimate business activities, I assured her. The emergency stabilization funds deployed for contractor payments demonstrate that commitment. The protective measures target only unauthorized diversions and personal misappropriation. Several board members appreciate that distinction, she replied, her tone suggesting she was among them. We're reconvening formally tomorrow morning to determine appropriate board response. In the meantime, we've requested Richard take no further unilateral actions affecting company operations. Has he agreed to that limitation? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Not explicitly, Isabella admitted. His response was less than reassuring. After ending the call, I joined Patricia, Maria, and Thomas in the conference room where our emergency response team had assembled. The Situation Board displayed real-time updates on various fronts: legal filings, financial controls, corporate governance interventions, security measures, and communication management. Richard has escalated beyond financial self-preservation into active corporate sabotage, Thomas observed gravely. Removing financial staff, restricting system access, and attempting to isolate information flows demonstrates consciousness of guilt and intent to obstruct legitimate oversight. It also strengthens our case for emergency judicial intervention, Maria added. Judge Harriman has granted us a hearing at 4:30 p.m. today to address these new developments. Patricia provided troubling additional context. Before my credentials were revoked, I observed Richard attempting to initiate wire transfers to multiple offshore entities, not just Sunset Horizons. The pattern suggests he's trying to distribute funds across multiple destinations to complicate recovery efforts. Were the transfers successful? I asked. No. The dual authentication requirements prevented completion. But he's clearly searching for any available financial channel that might still be under his sole control. I considered this information carefully. Richard's accelerating his extraction attempts while simultaneously trying to create organizational chaos as cover. He's abandoning any pretense of legitimate business operations in favor of personal financial salvage. The traditional playbook for cornered executives, Thomas noted, creates sufficient disorder to obscure specific actions, dispute causality, and establish plausible deniability. His current actions eliminate any remaining ambiguity about intentions, I observed. The trust's intervention is fully vindicated by this response alone. Our strategy session was interrupted by an urgent call from the Harrington Properties head of security, Michael Reynolds, a 20-year company veteran who had served since Williams' leadership. "Mrs. Harrington, we have a situation requiring immediate attention," he began, his professional tone underscored with genuine concern. "Mr. Harrington has directed removal and transfer of certain archival materials from secure storage, including original trust documentation, historical financial records, and corporate governance archives." This development was genuinely alarming. The materials described included irreplaceable historical documentation of the Harrington legacy, records dating back generations that chronicled the family's business evolution and governance principles. "Under whose authority is this removal occurring?" I asked. Mr. Harrington presented executive authorization citing strategic document protection during governance transition. Several board members have subsequently contacted security expressing concern about these removals, creating conflicting directives. I made an immediate decision. "Michael, please inform your team that the Harrington Family Trust, as beneficial owner of those archival materials, directs that they remain secured in their current location pending formal board clarification. I'll provide written confirmation of this directive immediately." "Understood," he replied, the relief evident in his voice. "That provides clear guidance until governance questions are resolved." After ending the call, I turned to our assembled team. "Richard's attempting to secure or potentially destroy original documentation that might further evidence misconduct. We need to execute the full preservation protocol immediately." The preservation protocol was another contingency we had prepared, a comprehensive legal and technical framework for securing all relevant documentation across physical and digital domains. Maria immediately coordinated its implementation, while Thomas prepared supplementary legal filings addressing this new attempt at evidence manipulation. At 3:15 p.m., we received confirmation that Judge Harriman had expanded our emergency hearing scope to include the document preservation issues. Simultaneously, Bradford Wells called to inform me that he had convened an executive session of the board for 5 p.m., specifically to address Richard's increasingly erratic unilateral actions. Several directors have expressed serious concerns about potential liability exposure given recent developments, Bradford explained. The removal of financial staff and attempt to transfer archival materials without board approval have elevated governance concerns substantially. The trust shares those concerns, I assured him. Our priority remains protecting legitimate business operations and preserving the Harrington legacy. All interventions have been designed with those objectives as guiding principles. I believe most board members now recognize that distinction, Bradford acknowledged. The documentation you provided, combined with Richard's subsequent actions, has clarified the situation considerably. As 4:30 p.m. approached, we prepared for the emergency judicial hearing. The expanded evidence package now included documentation of Richard's post-board meeting actions, the staff removals, system lockdowns, attempted offshore transfers, and document extraction efforts. Each desperate maneuver had strengthened our case for intervention while undermining his remaining credibility. Judge Harriman reviewed the supplementary evidence with growing concern visible in his expression. These actions suggest escalating attempts to circumvent this court's previous orders and obstruct legitimate financial governance, he observed. The pattern indicates increasing rather than diminishing risk to assets and documentation under dispute. We concur with that assessment, Your Honor, Thomas responded. The trust's interventions were designed to be proportionate and targeted. Recent events have demonstrated that more comprehensive protective measures are now necessary. The judge nodded gravely. The court grants the expanded temporary restraining orders as requested. All Harrington Properties documentation, both physical and digital, is to be preserved in current form and location. Corporate officers are explicitly prohibited from removing, altering, or transferring any company records pending full evidentiary hearing. He continued with additional protections. The court further directs that no personnel actions affecting financial staff may be implemented without prior judicial review. The dual authentication payment structure shall remain in effect for all corporate expenditures to ensure business continuity while preventing unauthorized diversions. As we departed the courthouse with the expanded orders in hand, Maria received an urgent message from our technical team monitoring Harrington Properties systems. Richard attempted to access and delete server backups containing financial transaction histories approximately 20 minutes ago, she reported. The attempt was blocked by security protocols, but it represents yet another escalation in efforts to eliminate evidence. This development was particularly significant. A direct attempt to destroy corporate financial records could potentially cross the line from civil misconduct into criminal territory. Document this attempt with timestamp verification and technical confirmation, I instructed. Add it to the evidence package for tomorrow's board meeting and copy to the court's evidence repository. By 5 p.m., Bradford Wells had convened the executive session of the Harrington Properties Board. Though not physically present, we received real-time updates from Isabella Thornton, who had emerged as a key ally in maintaining proper governance. The mood has shifted dramatically, she texted. Richard's post-meeting actions have alarmed even his strongest supporters on the board. The attempted document transfers particularly crossed a line for several directors with long company history. At 5:45 p.m., Bradford called to inform me of the board's emergency resolution. Richard had been placed on administrative leave pending comprehensive review of financial activities and governance concerns. Chief Operating Officer James Mercer would assume interim leadership responsibilities, with explicit direction to cooperate fully with trust oversight and restoration of proper financial controls. The vote was unanimous, Bradford reported, his tone suggesting this outcome had surprised even him. Richard's actions following our earlier meeting eliminated any remaining ambiguity about appropriate board response. His attempts to restrict information access and remove corporate records were viewed as particularly troubling from a governance perspective. How did Richard respond to the board's decision? I asked, though I could well imagine. Not well, Bradford admitted. There was considerable verbal resistance. Security was ultimately required to escort him from the building after he refused to comply with the administrative leave directive. The image of Richard, always so conscious of appearance and authority, being escorted from the headquarters building bearing his family name, was a stark illustration of how completely his position had collapsed in less than 24 hours. The board has also directed immediate restoration of all financial staff to their positions, with Patricia Whitmore authorized to implement comprehensive system access recovery, Bradford continued. We've requested trust cooperation in stabilizing operations during this transition period. The trust will provide all necessary support for legitimate business continuity, I assured him. The emergency stabilization funds remain available. For verified operational requirements, and additional resources can be deployed if necessary for project preservation. By 7 p.m., reports from multiple sources confirmed that Richard had retreated to the Four Seasons Hotel. Not his usual preference, but likely chosen for its privacy protocols regarding high-profile guests. Monitoring indicated he had been in continuous contact with Martin Bradshaw, presumably revising legal strategy given the day's devastating developments. Most tellingly, our surveillance team reported no contact between Richard and Melanie since the board meeting. Their planned departure to Grand Cayman, once scheduled for just 4 days from now, appeared increasingly remote as the financial resources required for their new beginning evaporated under judicial and corporate scrutiny. As night fell over, Boston, I reviewed the day's extraordinary events with Maria and Thomas. What had begun as Richard's attempted counteroffensive through the emergency board meeting had culminated in his administrative suspension, expanded judicial constraints, and restoration of proper financial governance structures. Richard miscalculated at every turn, Thomas observed. Each desperate maneuver only strengthened the case against him, while further undermining his remaining credibility. The fundamental error was assuming he could outmaneuver established governance systems through personal force of will, Maria added. The same confidence that served him in business development became fatal hubris when applied to circumventing financial controls. I nodded in agreement, though my thoughts had already turned to what would come next. Richard had been cornered but not yet defeated. His options were narrowing dramatically, but cornered adversaries often resort to their most extreme measures when conventional paths close. Prepare for potential media engagement, I instructed. Richard may attempt to shift this from governance, dispute to public narrative battle. His remaining leverage exists primarily in reputation management, rather than financial or operational control. As we concluded our strategy session, my secure phone registered an incoming message from an unexpected source. The simple text from Melanie Crane contained just 7 words. "We need to meet, alone, tomorrow morning." The request represented a potentially significant development, Melanie reaching out independently rather than as Richard's proxy. Whether this indicated fracturing of their alliance or simply a tactical approach remained to be seen, but it merited careful engagement. I replied with equal brevity, 8 Cow a.m., Boston Common, near the bandstand. Her response came immediately. "I'll be there." As I prepared to depart for the evening, Patricia called with one final update from Harrington Properties headquarters, where financial staff were working late to restore proper system access and documentation. "We've discovered something concerning in the transaction attempts from this afternoon," she reported. Before being placed on leave, Richard tried to initiate transfers to 3 previously unknown entities beyond Sunset Horizons. The account destinations appear to be in Liechtenstein, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. New extraction channels, I surmised. Established as contingency options if primary paths were discovered? Exactly. And the transfer authorizations included Melanie's electronic signature, though system logs show she wasn't physically present when they were submitted. This detail seemed particularly significant given Melanie's request for a meeting. "Preserve that evidence carefully," I instructed. "It may prove relevant to developing events." As I drove home through Boston's evening traffic, I reflected on the extraordinary acceleration of circumstances in just 2 days. What had begun with the discovery of drained accounts had evolved into comprehensive corporate governance intervention, judicial oversight, and Richard's removal from operational control of the company bearing his family name. The husband who had emptied our accounts for his girlfriend had indeed forgotten who controlled his trust. An oversight now compounded by increasingly desperate countermeasures that had only hastened his professional unraveling. Tomorrow would bring new developments, including whatever Melanie wished to discuss away from Richard's awareness. The confrontation had progressed beyond merely personal betrayal to fundamental questions about legacy, governance, and accountability. Whatever Melanie might reveal tomorrow, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Richard's carefully constructed extraction plan hadn't merely failed, it had triggered a comprehensive reevaluation of his entire professional position and the governance structures he had long taken for granted. Boston Common greeted the new day with gentle morning mist rising from dewy grass, the early hour ensuring relative privacy despite the public setting. I had arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a bench near the bandstand with clear sightlines in all directions. A precaution born of professional habit rather than specific concern. Security remained a consideration, however. Thomas had insisted on a discreet protection detail positioned at a respectful distance, visible enough to deter potential confrontation, but removed enough to allow genuine conversation. The past day's escalations warranted such precautions, particularly given Richard's increasingly unpredictable behavior. At precisely 8 a.m., Melanie Crane appeared on the pathway leading to the bandstand. Her typically polished professional appearance had given way to something more subdued, hair pulled back simply, minimal makeup, clothing chosen for practicality rather than impression. The transformation suggested both pragmatic adjustment to changing circumstances and, perhaps, emotional recalibration. She hesitated briefly upon spotting the security personnel before continuing toward me with determined steps. As she approached, I noticed the subtle indicators of someone operating under significant stress: tension around the eyes, slightly irregular breathing, the unconscious adjusting of her shoulder bag's strap. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, taking a seat at the opposite end of the bench, close enough for private conversation but maintaining deliberate physical distance. "Your message suggested urgency," I replied neutrally. "I'm listening." Melanie gazed across the park for a long moment, as if gathering both thoughts and resolve. "I need to clarify my position in this situation," she said finally. "The narrative Richard has been advancing doesn't align with reality in several critical respects." "Which aspects specifically?" I asked, maintaining professional detachment despite my genuine curiosity. She turned to face me directly. "Richard presented our relationship as a recent development, a mutual attraction that evolved gradually through professional proximity. That's not accurate. He pursued me aggressively from my first week at Harrington Properties, explicitly promising career advancement in exchange for personal involvement. This revelation, while not entirely surprising, provided valuable context about power dynamics I had previously only suspected. The financial arrangements were similarly misrepresented," Melanie continued. "Richard characterized Sunset Horizons as a legitimate business entity we would build together. Only recently did I discover its true purpose as a vehicle for extracting funds before our planned departure." "When did you become aware of this distinction?" I inquired. "Definitively?" "2 weeks ago, when I accidentally accessed documentation showing systematic transfers from both personal and corporate accounts. When confronted, Richard claimed these were necessary preparatory measures for our fresh start that would be legitimized retrospectively." Her expression reflected genuine discomfort with these recollections. I expressed concerns about the methods, particularly regarding corporate funds. He assured me everything was structured to appear proper through creative accounting that would withstand scrutiny. "And the Grand Cayman arrangements?" "Initially presented as a strategic business trip to establish banking relationships for our new venture. The permanent relocation aspect only became clear in recent days, coinciding with accelerated financial movements." I absorbed this information carefully, noting both what Melanie was revealing and what she was potentially omitting. Her account portrayed her as manipulated rather than complicit, a characterization that might contain elements of truth while serving her current interests. "Your electronic signature appears on transfer authorization submitted yesterday," I noted, "including attempts to move funds to previously undisclosed entities in Liechtenstein, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands." A flash of genuine surprise crossed her features. "I never authorized those transfers. My credentials were established on the system for Sunset Horizons documentation, but I haven't accessed financial platforms since before the board meeting." "Suggesting Richard used your authentication without consent," I observed. "Yes," she confirmed, her expression hardening slightly. "Which aligns with an emerging pattern I've begun to recognize only recently." Melanie removed a slim USB drive from her bag, holding it without immediately offering it. "This contains documentation I believe you should have. Emails, planning, documents, conversation recordings, and financial projections Richard shared regarding our supposed future together." "Why are you providing this now?" I asked, the question addressing both timing and motivation. Her response came after careful consideration. 3 reasons. First, self-preservation. Richard's actions have crossed lines I never agreed to, involving me in potentially serious legal exposure without my informed consent. Second, professional integrity. Despite how appearances suggest otherwise, I built my career through competence and work ethic, not advancement through inappropriate relationships. She paused, seeming to weigh the appropriateness of her final reason. And third, perhaps less, nobly, I've recognized that Richard manipulated me just as systematically as he attempted to manipulate financial systems and corporate governance. The promised future was a tactical fiction designed to secure my participation in arrangements that primarily served his interests. I accepted the USB drive with professional neutrality despite its potentially significant evidentiary value. What do you anticipate happening next? Richard contacted me repeatedly last night after being placed on administrative leave, she revealed. His messages progressed from strategic planning to increasingly desperate demands for loyalty, culminating in explicit threats that if his position collapsed, he would ensure I faced equal consequences. How did you respond? I didn't, which further escalated his tone. The final message suggested he had documentation implicating me as the primary architect of financial irregularities, evidence he would deploy if I failed to support his narrative. This development aligned with concerns Thomas had raised about potential scapegoating as Richard's options narrowed. The classic maneuver of cornered executives often involved identifying subordinates to bear responsibility for improper actions. Do you believe such documentation exists? I asked. Not legitimately, Melanie replied. But Richard has resources and connections that could potentially fabricate convincing alternatives to reality. Hence my decision to establish the actual record proactively. The strategic calculation was clear. Melanie was positioning herself as cooperative witness rather than co-conspirator, providing evidence that might mitigate her own exposure while undermining Richard's remaining credibility. What are you seeking in exchange for this cooperation? I inquired directly. Not immunity, she clarified immediately. I recognize my choices created this situation, regardless of manipulative influences. I accept appropriate consequences for actual involvement. She continued with notable precision. What I'm seeking is proportionality and contextual understanding. I participated in preparations for departure based on misrepresented circumstances. I did not authorize fund diversions, participate in corporate governance violations, or knowingly engage in financial misconduct. The distinction she drew was calculated but not unreasonable, acknowledging personal relationship impropriety while distancing herself from financial and corporate governance violations. Your professional future at Harrington Properties is obviously compromised, I observed. What are your plans moving forward? Professional rehabilitation elsewhere, eventually, she answered with surprising candor. Though I recognize that requires accepting appropriate accountability first. My immediate priority is ensuring accurate understanding of events, rather than allowing Richard's increasingly desperate narrative to define everyone's perception. I considered her position carefully. Melanie's cooperation could provide valuable, additional evidence regarding Richard's intentions and methods, particularly if she had indeed preserved communications that revealed his explicit planning. The materials you're providing will be reviewed and potentially utilized in ongoing proceedings, I informed her. If they contain evidence of additional misconduct, that evidence will be pursued regardless of potential implications for any involved parties. I understand and accept that condition, she affirmed. Your cooperation will be noted in relevant contexts, I continued. Though specific outcomes regarding your personal situation will depend on comprehensive assessment of all evidence, including materials you've provided. Melanie nodded her acceptance of these terms. There's one additional matter you should be aware of, she added, her expression growing more serious. Richard mentioned contingency plans involving potential reputation management strategies if financial extraction failed. The specifics weren't clear, but he suggested having leverage regarding sensitive family information that could create public relations challenges. This veiled reference to potential personal attacks aligned with our anticipation of Richard, potentially shifting to reputation warfare as financial options closed. The warning was useful confirmation of concerns we had already incorporated into contingency planning. "Thank you for that information," I acknowledged. "Is there anything else you believe I should know immediately?" "Just one thing," she replied, rising to signal our meeting's conclusion. "Richard genuinely doesn't understand why his plan failed. Even now, he remains convinced that his financial extraction should have succeeded, that his board influence should have prevailed, that his narrative should have been accepted. The recognition that he fundamentally miscalculated regarding your capabilities and position isn't just professional, it's deeply personal." This final observation offered perhaps the most valuable insight of our entire conversation. A window into Richard's psychological framework that explained his increasingly erratic countermeasures. His worldview simply couldn't accommodate the reality that his wife had systematically outmaneuvered him across multiple domains simultaneously. As Melanie departed along a different path than she had arrived, I remained seated briefly, processing the interaction. Her cooperation represented significant tactical advantage in ongoing proceedings, though her motivations blended self-preservation with genuine recognition of manipulation, a complex mixture typical of those extracting themselves from compromised situations. I secured the USB drive and messaged Thomas to arrange immediate forensic verification of its contents. Whatever evidence Melanie had provided would require thorough authentication before strategic utilization. My phone chimed with an incoming call from Bradford Wells. "Eleanor, we've encountered an unexpected development at headquarters this morning. Richard attempted to access the building despite his administrative leave status. When denied entry, he became confrontational with security personnel. The situation was managed without physical escalation, but his behavior has raised additional concerns among board members." "Has he made any specific demands or claims?" I inquired. "He insisted on accessing his office to retrieve personal effects, but security protocols established yesterday require supervised access and inventory documentation. When informed of these requirements, he departed after making concerning statements about alternative methods of resolving the situation." "Have security measures been reinforced?" I asked. "Yes, comprehensive protocols are in place for all facilities and systems. But his increasingly unpredictable behavior has accelerated board discussions regarding permanent leadership changes rather than temporary administrative leave. This development suggested Richard's position was deteriorating, even faster than anticipated, his own actions further undermining whatever institutional support might have remained. "The trust will cooperate fully with appropriate board governance decisions," I assured Bradford. "Our priority remains protecting legitimate business operations and preserving the Harrington legacy through this challenging transition." After ending the call, I messaged Maria requesting immediate preparation for potential media engagement. Richard's failed attempt to access headquarters despite explicit administrative leave suggested escalating desperation that might soon manifest as public narrative manipulation. The meeting with Melanie, combined with Richard's confrontational building access attempt, painted a clear picture of rapidly dissolving alliances and increasingly limited options. The sophisticated extraction plan that had begun with systematically draining our joint accounts was now collapsing completely, leaving its architect with few remaining paths beyond desperate countermeasures. As I walked back through Boston Common toward my waiting car, the irony wasn't lost on me. Richard had initiated this chain of events by assuming he could simply take what wasn't properly his: financial resources, corporate authority, trust, assets. Each attempt had not merely failed, but accelerated his comprehensive unraveling across professional, financial, and personal domains simultaneously. The husband who had emptied our accounts for his girlfriend had forgotten who controlled his trust. Now that girlfriend was providing evidence against him, while his executive authority evaporated through his own increasingly self-destructive actions. The reckoning was accelerating beyond even my carefully structured interventions, driven primarily by Richard's own desperate responses to collapsing circumstances. The anticipation of Richard's potential public narrative offensive proved prescient far sooner than expected. By 10:30 a.m., Maria contacted me with urgent news that Richard had scheduled a press conference at the Four Seasons Hotel for noon. A hastily arranged media event with local business journalists already receiving enigmatic invitations to hear critical revelations regarding Harrington Properties governance. "He's pivoting to reputation warfare," Thomas observed as our crisis team assembled in my office. "With financial extraction blocked, corporate authority suspended, and legal options narrowing, public narrative manipulation represents his remaining leverage attempt." "The timing is telling," Maria added. "He's moving quickly to establish his version of events before the board can formalize more permanent leadership changes or before full evidence reaches public awareness." I considered the strategic implications carefully. Richard's most likely approach will combine victimhood positioning with counter-accusations. He'll present himself as target of unwarranted trustee overreach while suggesting improper motives behind the interventions. "Do we attempt to preempt his press conference?" Thomas asked. "No," I decided after careful consideration. "Reactive positioning serves our interests better in this instance. Let Richard establish claims publicly that can then be systematically refuted with documented evidence. Preemption might appear defensive rather than measured." I turned to Maria. "Prepare comprehensive response materials addressing likely accusations. Focus on verifiable timeline, independent documentation, and judicial validation of trust actions. Emphasize business continuity protection rather than personal conflict." "And media strategy?" she inquired. "No direct participation in immediate news cycle," I specified. "Provide factual corrections to specific misrepresentations, but avoid creating perception of competing narratives. The evidence should speak for itself, without emotional amplification." As these preparations advanced, Bradford Wells called with news from Harrington Properties headquarters. "Eleanor, the board has convened an emergency session regarding Richard's announced press conference. Several directors are deeply concerned about potential corporate reputation damage from public airing of governance disputes. Has the board considered issuing its own statement before Richard speaks?" I asked. "That's being debated currently," Bradford confirmed. "Some members favor getting ahead of potential misrepresentations, while others prefer withholding comment until actual claims can be addressed specifically. The trust's position supports whichever approach the board determines most appropriate," I assured him. "Though if specific guidance is helpful, evidence suggests addressing actual claims with factual corrections typically proves more effective than anticipatory positioning." "That aligns with majority thinking," Bradford acknowledged. "We're drafting a brief holding statement emphasizing board commitment to proper governance and ongoing operations while reserving substantive response until after Richard's specific claims are articulated." This measured approach reflected growing board sophistication regarding the situation, moving beyond initial shock toward strategic management of complex governance challenges. At 11:40 a.m., just 20 minutes before Richard's scheduled press conference, an unexpected development emerged. Martin Bradshaw, Richard's aggressive litigation counsel, contacted Thomas directly. "Bradshaw is requesting urgent discussion regarding potential resolution paths before his client's media appearance," Thomas reported, covering the phone's microphone. "He's suggesting Richard might be willing to consider cooperative approaches if certain accommodations can be reached immediately." The timing of this overture, minutes before a publicized press conference, suggested desperation rather than genuine settlement interest. The classic tactic of creating artificial deadline pressure to extract concessions was transparent, but required appropriate response nonetheless. Inform Bradshaw that the trust remains open to resolution discussions, based on full financial transparency and appropriate accountability, I instructed. However, artificial time constraints created by his client's voluntary media scheduling don't constitute genuine emergency requiring immediate concessions. Thomas conveyed this position with professional precision, reporting Bradshaw's reaction as controlled frustration with underlying anxiety. The attorney had apparently hoped to secure last-minute concessions using the press conference as leverage, a miscalculation that further revealed Richard's deteriorating strategic judgment. At precisely noon, Richard appeared before assembled media at the Four Seasons. The live stream displayed on our office monitors showed him attempting to project his customary confident authority despite visible stress indicators, tension in his facial muscles, slight perspiration at the temples, unconscious adjustment of his tie as he approached the podium. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice carrying practiced smoothness despite the circumstances. "I've called this briefing to address concerning developments affecting Harrington Properties, developments that require public clarification given their potential impact on employees, investors, and the Boston business community." What followed was a masterclass in narrative manipulation, a carefully constructed version of events that contained just enough factual elements to support fundamentally misleading conclusions. Recent financial restrictions affecting Harrington Properties operations stem from unusual trustee interventions during what began as a private disagreement, Richard claimed, skillfully positioning complex financial misconduct as mere marital discord. These interventions have disrupted normal business operations, threatened project continuity, and created unnecessary governance complications. He continued with increasing confidence as reporters took notes. "I've devoted my professional life to building upon the Harrington legacy, expanding development activities that enhance Boston's economic vitality while providing employment for hundreds of dedicated professionals. That mission is currently threatened by trustee overreach and governance confusion, resulting from blurred boundaries between personal matters and corporate oversight. The deliberate characterization of systematic financial extraction as mere personal matters represented precisely the narrative reframing we had anticipated. Richard was attempting to position himself as corporate defender against trustee interference rather than perpetrator of financial misconduct. Most concerning, he continued gravely, these interventions appear motivated by factors beyond legitimate trust administration. The timing and nature of restrictions suggest deliberate attempt to exercise improper control over corporate operations outside appropriate governance channels. This veiled accusation of improper motives represented the counterattack component of his strategy, suggesting nefarious intent behind documented protective measures. To preserve operational integrity and protect stakeholder interests, I've reluctantly concluded that public transparency regarding these circumstances has become necessary, Richard stated with practiced regret. While I had hoped to resolve these matters privately, the escalating nature of restrictions and increasingly concerning governance interventions require broader awareness. As Richard opened the floor to questions, journalists predictably focused on the implied marital conflict underlying corporate disruption. "Can you clarify the nature of the private disagreement you referenced?" asked a reporter from the Boston Business Journal. Richard's response demonstrated careful calibration. "While I'm reluctant to discuss personal matters publicly, I can acknowledge that my wife Eleanor and I have experienced communication challenges regarding financial priorities and trust administration approaches. These private discussions have unfortunately expanded into corporate governance domains in ways that threaten legitimate business operations. Are you concerned about potential leadership changes at Harrington Properties?" inquired another journalist. "My concern focuses on organizational stability and project continuity rather than personal position," Richard answered with practiced humility. "The Harrington legacy transcends any individual, including myself. My priority remains protecting that legacy from disruption caused by unwarranted interventions and governance confusion. The performance continued for approximately 20 minutes, with Richard maintaining disciplined messaging throughout. Each response reinforced his core narrative: dedicated corporate leader facing unwarranted trustee interference stemming from private disagreement, motivated by concern for organizational stability rather than personal interest. As the press conference concluded, our crisis team assessed the potential impact with professional objectivity. He's established a simplified, narrative framework that journalists without detailed background will find accessible, Maria observed. Private disagreement leading to corporate disruption provides cleaner storyline than complex financial misconduct evidence. The victimhood positioning was particularly calculated, Thomas added, presenting himself as reluctant whistleblower, forced to go public rather than self-interested actor attempting narrative manipulation. I considered these assessments carefully before responding. Richard delivered exactly the performance we anticipated: skilled narrative construction leveraging his considerable communication abilities. The question now becomes how effectively documented evidence can correct these misrepresentations without creating perception of competing personal claims. Before we could finalize our response strategy, Bradford Wells called with the board's reaction. Several directors are deeply concerned about Richard's characterizations, he reported. The suggestion that corporate governance challenges stem merely from marital disagreement, rather than documented financial improprieties, strikes many as fundamentally misleading, particularly given evidence reviewed during yesterday's meetings. How does the board intend to respond? I inquired. We're finalizing a formal statement emphasizing 3 key points, Bradford explained. First, that board actions regarding administrative leave resulted from specific governance concerns rather than external pressure. Second, that financial controls were implemented to protect legitimate operations rather than restrict them. And third, that comprehensive review of all relevant evidence continues with commitment to appropriate corporate governance standards. That approach strikes appropriate balance, I commended. Factual correction without personal conflict amplification maintains proper governance focus. I'm listening, I replied, maintaining professional detachment despite the personal connection. Public conflict serves neither our interests, he continued. Perhaps there's more constructive path forward that addresses legitimate concerns while avoiding further escalation. The conciliatory tone represented significant departure from his recent approaches, further evidence of rapidly diminishing options as coordinated financial, legal, and corporate interventions systematically closed potential escape routes. The key trust remains open to constructive resolution based on complete financial transparency and appropriate accountability measures, I responded evenly. Those parameters haven't changed despite recent developments. A brief silence followed before Richard spoke again, his voice carrying edge of resignation beneath maintained composure. I'd like to discuss specific terms without intermediaries. Perhaps tomorrow morning? That can be arranged, I confirmed, though legal counsel presence would be advisable given ongoing proceedings. Fine, he conceded, the single word carrying complex emotional undertones. Your office, 9 a.m. After the call ended, I shared the development with Thomas and Maria, who received the news with professional caution, tempered by recognition of potential significance. Richard's direct engagement request suggests recognition of diminishing alternatives, Thomas observed. Though prudence dictates maintaining full documentation and representation during any discussions. Agreed, I confirmed. Prepare comprehensive resolution framework addressing all dimensions: financial restoration, corporate governance transition, trust administration protocols, and appropriate accountability measures. As our team dispersed to prepare for tomorrow's potential negotiation, I took a moment to reflect on the extraordinary compression of events. What had begun just days ago with discovery of drained accounts had accelerated through systematic intervention, corporate governance disruption, judicial, engagement, and now potential resolution negotiations. Throughout this progression, Richard's fundamental miscalculation had remained consistent, underestimating the capabilities, preparation, and resolve of the wife he had planned to abandon after emptying their accounts. The husband who had forgotten, who controlled his trust, was now confronting comprehensive consequences across every domain of his previously confident existence. Tomorrow's meeting would reveal whether this recognition had progressed sufficiently to enable genuine resolution or merely represented tactical repositioning as options continued narrowing around him. Either way, the trust's position remained secure, the evidence thoroughly documented, and the protective interventions systematically implemented across financial, legal, and corporate dimensions simultaneously. The morning of the trust disbursement meeting arrived with the crystalline clarity that often follows periods of intense turbulence. 28 days had passed since discovering our drained accounts. 28 days that had fundamentally reshaped the landscape of my life, Richard's career, and the Harrington legacy. I stood by the window of my office, watching early sunlight transform Boston's skyline into a tapestry of gold and glass. The view had remained constant throughout. These extraordinary weeks, a reminder that even during personal upheaval, the broader world maintained its steady rhythms. "Everything is prepared," Maria confirmed, entering with the final documentation for today's proceedings. "The board members will arrive at 10, followed by legal representatives. Richard and his counsel are scheduled for 10:30. "And the financial summary?" I inquired, turning from the window. "Complete recovery of diverted funds has been achieved," she reported with professional satisfaction. "The forensic accounting team confirmed final reconciliation yesterday. All unauthorized transfers have been reversed and documented for the official record. This represented the culmination of financial recovery efforts implemented since our confrontation with Richard 3 weeks earlier." The expanded attendance reflected the meeting's dual function: formal trust disbursement review and implementation of restructured corporate governance protocols. Richard arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by Martin Bradshaw and flanked by 2 junior attorneys carrying document portfolios. His appearance reflected careful calibration, professionally appropriate without projecting his former dominance, necessarily present without attempting to control proceedings. Our acknowledgement was mutual and minimal, professional recognition, without personal engagement. The weeks since negotiated resolution had established clear boundaries between necessary organizational interaction and severed personal connection. Bradford Wells called the meeting to order with appropriate formality. Today's proceedings serve dual purpose: conducting the scheduled 7-year trust disbursement review and implementing revised corporate governance structures as established through negotiated resolution. We'll begin with the trust disbursement component. I presented the comprehensive trust review with professional thoroughness, detailed assessment of prior disbursement utilization, analysis of current portfolio performance, evaluation of beneficiary conduct considerations, and proposed distribution parameters for the coming cycle. The presentation acknowledged Richard's legitimate achievements during certain business phases, while documenting the misconduct that had necessitated intervention. The approach reflected the trust's fundamental purpose: supporting genuine legacy advancement while preventing misappropriation or reputation damage. When discussion opened regarding proposed distributions, Richard's participation remained measured and appropriate, focused on legitimate organizational considerations rather than personal financial interests. The behavioral shift reflected either genuine recalibration or pragmatic acceptance of permanently altered circumstances. The board unanimously approved the restructured disbursement framework, which maintained support for legitimate Harrington Properties operations while implementing enhanced governance controls regarding fund utilization. The approach balanced legacy preservation with appropriate accountability for past misconduct. As the trust component concluded, Bradford transitioned to corporate governance implementation. The board has approved comprehensive leadership transition as established through negotiated resolution. James Mercer's appointment as CEO has been formalized, with appropriate succession planning and governance enhancement measures implemented. Concurrently, Richard's expression remained professionally neutral as his permanent replacement was officially confirmed. Whatever private emotions might exist beneath that carefully maintained facade remained appropriately contained within. Professional context. The meeting concluded with structured efficiency, each participant departing with clear understanding of revised organizational parameters and governance expectations. Richard and his legal team were among the first to exit, their role in proceedings, complete with documented resolutions signed and filed. As the conference room emptied, Isabella Thornton approached with characteristic directness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.